The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Bender. I am the chair of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee, and I will call to order our regular committee meeting for Thursday, August 20th. I'd like to note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Reich.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Ellison. Ellison. Goodman.
Present.
Cano.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Jenkins. Jenkins. President Bender.
Here.
There are 10 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum for today's meeting. Before we begin with the agenda for today, I want to take a moment to welcome a new leader at the City of Minneapolis. We have a new Chief Financial Officer, Dushani Dai, who comes to us from Ramsey County, where she served as the Deputy CFO. And I will invite City Coordinator Mark Ruff to introduce her. Is Mr. Ruff on the call?
Madam President, this is Casey. I don't see Mr. Ruff on the call. I know he was invited but had some other potential scheduling conflicts, and so I'm not for sure that he is available right this moment, but I do know that Ms. Dye is on the phone, and perhaps we can just recognize her and ask her to provide an introduction of herself.
Great, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Welcome. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Chair Bender, committee members. Good afternoon. My name is Dushani Dai. I'm excited to join the city as the new CFO. As Chair Bender mentioned, I come to the city having worked in government finance most of my career. I've held finance leadership positions within Hennepin County and most recently as the Deputy Finance Director at Ramsey County. I obtained my bachelor's and master's degrees locally at University of St. Thomas, and I've lived in the Twin Cities area most of my life. Oh, the light goes off behind me. I look forward to being a partner to elected and appointed leaders, and especially the professionals in the Finance and Property Services Department as we serve the people of Minneapolis. Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. We are excited to have you as part of the Minneapolis team, and we all are looking forward to working with you in a really challenging time with our budget. So we really welcome the expertise that you're bringing to this role. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll proceed with the agenda items on today's meeting agenda. The first hearing was on the reappointment of the fire chief. That was opened at our July 23rd meeting and continued to today's meeting. Since that meeting, Chief Friedel has announced his intent to retire this October. So I will move to delete this reappointment from the agenda. But first we have to formally reopen the public hearing. So I'll ask staff if there are any speakers in queue who would like to speak on item 1. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move to delete this item from our agenda. Any discussion on the motion to delete? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Cano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item is adopted and will go to the City Council meeting on Friday, next Friday. The next item is a public hearing for an ordinance related to easing restrictions for employee furloughs immediately before or after paid holidays. This ordinance was introduced by Councilmember Palmisano. I'll recognize our Labor Relations Director, Laura Davis, to give a brief presentation on this item. Ms. Davis.
I was muted. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Chair Bender, Vice Chair Jenkins, and members of the committee. Could I share my screen for just a moment to be able to put the furlough ordinance on the screen? I'm not sure if this will let me override. Can you see that on the screen now?
It's
No?
possible we could also ask the clerk to potentially put the ordinance on the screen.
Let's see. Yeah, it's not.
Ms. Davis, I think that the ordinance was in the packet, and as the president said, if the technical team can pull up a copy of that ordinance, they can display that while you're talking.
Okay, and it's not visible right now because on my end it is showing that it's on the screen. Or it's showing that I have shared it.
It's showing on the screen right now if you just want to leave that alone.
Wonderful, thank you. So now I need to look at it. Okay. Good afternoon. This is a very small change to the ordinance, section 20.360, which modifies the language of when an employee can be paid for a holiday, notwithstanding the fact that they are not working. The current language, as you can see, indicates that in order to be paid for one of the city's recognized holidays, an employee is required to work at least 2 hours before the holiday, 2 hours on the day before the holiday and 2 hours on the day after the holiday, or they are on vacation or sick leave. So generally, an employee is required to be in paid status. The suggested change here is to allow employees that are also being placed on mandatory furlough, either the day before or after a holiday, to still be paid for the holiday, notwithstanding the unpaid status. And the primary reason for this change, I would add, is that the letters of agreement that we are reaching with the bargaining units that will be participating in the mandatory furloughs also allow for this, and it was important to reach equity with our non-union employees that will also be participating in the mandatory furloughs, including the non-represented, the politically appointed, and the appointed city employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Are there any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. We do not have any speakers registered for this item. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. May I have a motion on this ordinance?
So moved.
I will second that. So we have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance as recommended by staff. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, with thanks to Councilmember Palmisano for bringing this forward, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Cano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins. President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and that ordinance is approved. Next item is item number 3. It is a public hearing related to the Minneapolis 2019 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. We have Mr. Bauer from Intergovernmental Relations here to give a brief presentation on this item.
Good afternoon, Chair Bender, Vice Chair Jenkins, and members of the committee. I'm Matt Bauer, Manager of Resource Coordination in the Finance and Property Services Department, and I apologize for the background noise. You may be hearing the neighbor has a contractor doing some drilling. So the purpose of today's public hearing is to receive public comment on the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. This is a report to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on the city's performance on program year 2019 funding for the Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnerships Grant, Emergency Solutions Grant, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS grant programs. The program year ended on May 31st. Some highlights of this report is a completion of several new and rehabilitated affordable housing developments. Among these, the completion of the Great River Landing, a development serving formerly incarcerated persons. With our Emergency Solutions Grant homelessness funding, we had 75 households provided with rapid rehousing assistance. In total, the city expended $15.5 million among all these grants during the program year. A 15-day public comment period and a public hearing are required to receive comment on the report before it is submitted to HUD on August 31st. The public comment period runs August 12th through August 26th. All written comments and any comments received at this hearing will be included in the report to be submitted to HUD. This concludes my remarks for the report, and I can stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Are there any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. We do not have any speakers registered for this item. Would anyone like to speak on item 3? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and is approved, will be forwarded to the council meeting next Friday. Next, we have the consent agenda. We have 31 items on the consent agenda today, shown as items 4 through 34 on the printed agenda. As always, if any council members would like to move or ask to remove any of the items for discussion, I'm happy to accommodate that. And there are a number of important items on the consent agenda. Item 4 is approving the settlement of the lawsuit of Hinda Ismail versus Donald Brown in the city of Minneapolis by payment of $18,000 to Ms. Ismail and her attorney. Item 5 approves the settlement of the workers' compensation claim of Kristen Thompson and the city's appeal of Ms. Thompson's Public Employees Retirement Association appeal by payment of $130,500 to Ms. Thompson and her attorneys. Item 6 is receiving the Ethical Practice Board's 2019 annual report. Item 7 approves up to $306,200 in Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act Emergency Solutions Grant Round 2 funds for the American Indian Community Development Corporation for Homeless Street Outreach Services. Item 8 is receiving and filing a report on the results of the 4D Affordable Housing Incentive Program, which includes information about the program's impact in preserving naturally occurring affordable housing. Item 9 includes several contract agreements relating to the Housing Stabilization Pilot Program as shown in the agenda. Items 10 through 15 are various contract amendments related to a public service building project, the details of which are outlined on the agenda. Item 16 is the acceptance of the third low bid of Prevlov Inc. in the amount of $355,321 to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals necessary for ancillary furniture. This also includes and authorizes a contract for the project. Item 17 is a contract amendment that authorizes an increase to a contract with Messenger Construction Inc. in the amount of $12,088 for a total amount not to exceed $885,635 for construction modifications due to unforeseen conditions and minor architectural finish changes for the Americans with Disabilities Act all-gender restrooms improvements project at multiple facilities. Item 18 authorizes the customization of the terms and conditions of a contract with U.S. Bank for merchant card processing services. Item 19 is a resolution related to the refunding of previously issued general obligation bond series. Item 20 authorizes a multi-year lease with Lothenbach Properties II LLC and Imagine Express LLC and an annual amount not to exceed $1.2 million for the use of 2633 Minnehaha Avenue as the 3rd Precinct temporary site. Item 21 authorizes a contract with North Point Health and Wellness Center to provide domestic violence programming services. Item 22 is the receiving and filing of the August 2020 unclassified positions report. Item 23 authorizes a name change of the West Calhoun neighborhood to the West McCoska neighborhood. Item 24 authorizes a joint powers agreement with the City of St. Cloud and the Board of Water Commissioners of the City of St. Paul for the continued implementation of a source water protection activities under the Upper Mississippi Source Water Protection Project. Item 25 authorizes a conditional right of entry agreement with BAE Systems for environmental monitoring. Item 26 is the authorization of a cooperative agreement with Hennepin County whereby the city will receive an amount not to exceed $12,000 for water main construction costs related to the reconstruction of County State Aid Highway 204. Item 27 is resolution establishing a prioritized bridge replacement list. Item 28 authorizes an increase to the contract with VEIT and Company Inc. in the amount of $325,552 for an amount not to exceed $6.6 million for additional work and costs associated with unforeseen conditions at the Mid-City Industrial Phase 2 reconstruction project. Item 29 authorizes an increase to a contract with Affinitech Inc. in the amount of $90,365.10 for an amount not to exceed $1.3 million for the Minneapolis Parking Integrated Video Management System. Item 30 approves the layout for the 42nd Street East reconstruction project between 46th Avenue South and the West River Parkway. This also authorizes a negotiation with private property owners to acquire easements and additional right-of-way if necessary. Item 31 encompasses several actions relating to the acceptance of a grant from the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. Item 32 is the acceptance of a low bid of PCI Roads Incorporated, the amount of $197,900 to furnish all materials, equipment, labor, and tools necessary to install a sanitary sewer manhole for the Fridley Sewer Improvements Project. Item 33 is the acceptance of a low bid of Kai Kun Inc. in the amount of $226,500 to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals necessary for the Minneapolis Plaza ramp, 12th Street snow removal system repair, and authorizing a contract for the project. And item 34 encompasses the acceptance of several low bids for public towing services. Do my colleagues wish to pull any item off of today's consent agenda? I don't see any interest in pulling an item. I will move the agenda.
Madam
and
Chair.
then recognize Councilmember Gordon for comment on item 20. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. Item number 20 has to do with the lease agreement for the temporary relocation of the 3rd Precinct. And this location would be at 2633 Minnehaha Avenue, which is in the 2nd Ward. So I just wanted my colleagues to know that I've been briefed on this. I encourage folks to look at it. For the people in the 2nd Ward, this could pose certain challenges in terms of community worries and concerns and fears and hopes. I've barely started on a community engagement process to better understand that. You all if you aren't already, should be aware that this is roughly 4 blocks away from the Automax that was burned, the little closer to the Cub store that was destroyed and the Target, and just a little further than that from the 3rd precinct itself. One of the things that I think this lease will give us is some space and some breathing room in terms of what we will do with the 3rd precinct building itself, and that's been a topic of great discussion. This is a 3-year lease agreement proposal with an extension of another year, so I think that's something that people should be aware of. Also, my understanding is that the move-in date wouldn't be until October. One of the reasons for that has to do with vacating the current location, which may be needed in November for elections, which is at the convention center. But not moving in until October means there's more time for the community to kind of have a discussion about this. There may be opportunities to address some concerns in terms of how we do the redesign and prepare the site for it, and how we move into it. So I'm just going to be asking for some patience and some sensitivity from others as I understand better about what kind of impacts this might have or concerns from the community. I suspect many will welcome it. There's a sense of having the precinct closer to the heart of the area will make a difference than where it is now, the precinct headquarters. So we'll see. So I'm not foreshadowing what those outcomes of the community engagement might be. But I'm willing to support this step here, and I'll keep having conversations until Friday, and we'll see where we land there. And then also, if it goes forward after that, what we can do before October to make sure that we do this in as a respectful way, and maybe leveraging it to help us with some of the healing that definitely needs to be done in this part of our city that was so severely damaged and is still so severely scarred from the civil unrest that resulted from the killing of George Floyd.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to add to that point that as the council member who represents the area where the 3rd precinct headquarters were stationed, and where the city does own the property currently now for that site, that we have had people eagerly reaching out with various ideas about what the city could do with the 3rd precinct site. I know that I'm not supportive of reinstituting a 3rd precinct headquarters there. And I've said that publicly in the past, and just wanted to share that with colleagues here today. And, you know, in these conversations that we've been having regarding community engagement and a process, a public process for decision-making on sites like 38th and Chicago, I'll add that, you know, this particular intersection will also need a coherent, staff-supported, public-facing engagement process that the city can really structure and ground and support for the long term, as there will be many, many different opinions about what to do here for the future. The general area, as you can imagine, is pretty it's pretty challenged in that several buildings in that intersection were burned down. So it's not just about the future rebuild of the city-owned lot where the 3rd precinct headquarters are, but also the surrounding buildings on that block and on the blocks that are kitty corner to it. In general, that area is represented by myself, Councilmember Gordon, and Councilmember Johnson, just broadly speaking of kind of who's in that universe. And I know I've convened a meeting with my colleagues to talk a little bit about how we put a structure to a public-facing process that can help engage the many stakeholders in that area. So a part of that conversation is connected to the structure that we might put together for 38th in Chicago. And just to share with my colleagues here, the council president and the council vice president and I have been in conversations about how we do that. You know, how do we put that process together? What would it look like? And I don't think we have a specific item to bring forward today on this item, but I did want to let colleagues know that these are conversations that are happening, and we're very much thinking forward about how to put those pieces together in a publicly legible way so that folks don't depend on private relationships with council members to know what's going on, that there's a very external facing process that anyone can plug into and support or participate in or gather information about what decisions have been made, how and why, and what sort of are the next steps. So I just wanted to bring that context into this item as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the consent agenda? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just briefly comment on item number 23, which is the name change of a neighborhood in my ward. We'll be changing, based on this petition, the name of the West Calhoun neighborhood to West McCoska. And I would say this is a conversation that's been happening over the past couple of years in this part of the 13th Ward. I just wanted to affirm that while we cannot change the past, our neighbors in this neighborhood did not want to honor the legacy of Mr. Calhoun. There was much public discussion about what the new name would be, and there was a lot of public discussion about figuring out how they bring about that change in a meaningful way. Renaming a neighborhood certainly won't undo the past and past legacies and practices of our city. It is a small but potent symbol, I think, of our civic values. And this is one of Minneapolis's many beautiful neighborhoods. And it is now named intentionally and through a lot of public discussion to honor the Dakota occupants of this land and to really honor the history of the Dakota people in our city. So I just wanted to congratulate this neighborhood for going through that process, for spending a lot of time in conversation about it and what that means. And thank you for your support of making this important change.
Thank you. Any further discussion on any of the consent items? I do just want to mention that in the interest of time, we did not ask for a presentation about these items, but items 7, 8, and 9 are important pieces of our work to shelter and house folks in our community, either by preventing homelessness and eviction in the first place, working to stabilize rental properties that are in the very small 1 to 4 unit range, and providing some, so that item 9 is a series of grants to organizations that are working to stabilize rental housing in the 1 to 4 unit range. Item 8 is related to our 4D program, which is helping preserve affordable housing in rental properties across the city. And item 7 is part of the emergency solutions grant funds that we are getting out the door to community organizations, in this case the AICDC, to do services and outreach to folks who are experiencing homelessness, working to connect them to shelter, to services, and to housing. And we found, of course, I think it is heartbreaking for all of us to watch what's happening in our parks and across the city as folks are living in very unsafe conditions, but also, you know, no one wants to see people experiencing homelessness in the first place, and certainly not having to continue to leave and move from place to place. And so I think on the one hand, the solutions are quite simple, and that is we need more shelter and housing. But on the other hand, the work to connect people to those resources really takes a lot of one-on-one care. And we have folks who are sleeping unsheltered, who have been in housing and in shelter recently, who need help reconnecting to those supports and services. And we have found that that one-on-one outreach is really the most effective way to get people connected to housing. So the AICDC is a really important partner. This will almost double their capacity, and we expect them to be able to help connect, you know, a couple of hundred people to housing through this outreach work, and probably many more to shelter and services. So thanks to the housing staff who are continuing to work on this. And this is something that we could have back to one of the committees in the future for, I think, further and more in-depth discussion. Anything else on the consent agenda? Thank you all. Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins. Jenkins. President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries, and those items will be forwarded to the City Council meeting for final action a week from Friday. This brings us to 2 reports under discussion items in our agenda. Item 35 is a report on the current status and future work at the intersection of 38th and Chicago. When we talked about bringing this item to this committee, there wasn't time to notice a public hearing. So there hasn't been a public hearing noticed for this item. So today we will be having a staff presentation from Director Hutchison of the Public Works Department. I imagine my colleagues who represent the area will have some comments. Maybe there'll be questions. And then I believe our intention is to host a public hearing on this intersection and the decisions in the future. So thank you to my colleagues who have been working on this in their wards, and to Director Hutchison, welcome. And we'll start with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Bender and members of the committee. Thank you to the Clerk's Office for displaying the presentation. I'm Robin Hutchison, the Director of Public Works. I want to note that today I'm going to be joined by David Rubador, the Director of Neighborhood and Community Relations, and as well, Andrea Brennan, the Interim Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, is also with us to help to answer any questions that may come up. I'm going to be making a brief presentation today with an update on the intersection of 38th and Chicago. Before I go any further, I want to recognize the effort of a team of citywide staff who have poured their energy and their souls into this work. And in no real particular order, I'm just going to list staff. I know many of them are watching. They care deeply about what happens here and what happens in this city. Alexander Cato, Anthony Taylor, Bree Golding, Ethan Foley, Etrophic Burnett, Karen Moe, Melinda Zhang, Mary Altman, Trey Joyner, Zoe Teal, Steve Mosing, Dave Herberhold, Sarah McKenzie. I am positive I missed some people, and I apologize if I have, but I have to say their names. They have done tremendous work, really supporting this multidisciplinary collaborative effort. And the work that you see from this point forward is a reflection of their commitment. Today, we'll cover some history, the role of the streets, an engagement report, what we mean when we say phased reopening, some long-term commitments, and also some ways for the community to share input. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I will go into some recent history here just to set the frame. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a Black man, died in the custody of Minneapolis police at the intersection of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue. Since then, the intersection has been a focal point for people mourning George Floyd and calling for racial justice. George Floyd's death has sparked protests around the country calling for fundamental changes in policing and racist systems. This geographic intersection has a long cultural history within the African American community, especially as it relates to the city's role in supporting or thwarting wealth, community and asset building, housing, and access to economic security for the African American community. And 38th and Chicago is an access point between 4 distinct neighborhoods: Central, Bryant, Bancroft, and Powderhorn Park. It's also between 2 council wards, 8 and 9. In order to provide safe access for visitors to the site, the city placed barricades to through traffic while also ensuring ADA and emergency access. Since May, the barricades have remained in place, and during this time, we've been supporting the site by providing daily solid waste and recycling services, addressing access issues, and also addressing other needs that arise on a day-to-day basis. City elected officials and staff have been actively engaging with community members since May. David Rubador will cover more about that in his slides. We've heard so many perspectives about this intersection, both short and long-term desires and what is needed. Just note, this picture that you see here is from before the barricades were placed. So there was no doubt in our minds as a city that we needed to do something in May to protect the visitors to this place. You can go to the next slide, please. We've always known that the city's right-of-way, its streets have the power to support multiple city goals. We often note, and you have heard this from me before, that 22% of the city's land is within the right-of-way, and it's a powerful reminder that a street is more than just a place for cars. This is how we do our work. A street is a basic unit of urban space through which people experience a city. They are dynamic spaces that adapt over time and support environmental sustainability, public health, economic activity, and cultural significance. They also provide connectivity for people to what's most important for them in their daily lives, access to jobs, school, and for emergency response, just to name a few. We are acutely aware of this in our work to undo the systemic racism that is apparent in our transportation systems, the result of historic redlining practices, freeways that were built through neighborhoods in the 1960s, and the historic disinvestment in public transportation. This particular place has transformed into a place of reflection, mourning, community congregation, art, conversation, protest, pain, sorrow, joy, and reimagination. From that fateful day forward, we as a city enterprise and with the community have continually asked how we can eternalize this space for future generations so that its function can reflect community needs. This work has been a tremendous partnership to date, and I would like to have David Rubador, the Director of Neighborhood and Community Relations, talk for a few minutes about our engagement to date. So I'll pass it to David for just a couple of minutes. David?
Sorry, I was still on mute. My apologies. If we could advance to the next slide, that would be great. I just want to thank Director Hutchinson for the introduction and really the opportunity to be part of this presentation as well today. Good afternoon, Chair Bender and council members. My name is David Rubador, and I'm the Director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department with the City of Minneapolis. If we could advance to the next slide. There we go. So as Director Hutchinson stated, I'm going to give an update on the community engagement work that has occurred to date, but I also want to start with reiterating a bit of what she had said about our engagement team and the work that they've been doing. You can see their names listed on the slide here, and I just really want to thank the staff for their commitment and their work to supporting the engagement for the city. This has been a really complicated, emotional, and important situation for not only our city, but also for our country. And this has been a tremendous lift by our staff. The engagement team has spent many weekends and evenings meeting with community members over the past several months, and they have invested a lot of their professional as well as personal capital in making sure that we work towards a positive outcome for the intersection and its long-term impact in our community. Their commitment to seeing this through has been greatly appreciated and has been greatly valued. And I just cannot overstate the importance of the work that they have been doing. So starting with a summary of the work, the engagement work that has been done to date, beginning in mid-June, the engagement team developed a framework for engagement in the area. The approach started with taking the time to listen to the community and later evolved into supporting the community in a variety of ways. There have been many different groups meeting in the area, including twice daily on-the-street meetings with local organizers, a number of meetings and events hosted by the Bryant, Central, and Powderhorn neighborhoods, and various block club meetings near the intersection. Staff have attended over more than 80 different community-hosted meetings since mid-June and have had numerous conversations with community members and residents and businesses in the area. In addition to that, Council Vice President Jenkins and Councilmember Cano have also hosted a number of conversations, including a number of meetings where more than 200 people were attending. The council offices 311 and 911 have also received a number of calls and comments regarding 38th and Chicago, and we try to reflect what we've heard from all of these conversations in our report to you today. So if we can jump to the next slide. Recognizing the significance of both this intersection and the city's history, as Director Hutchinson has mentioned, and the impact of the killing of George Floyd, our initial engagement approach was to introduce ourselves as representatives of the city into the community. We knew that at some point the intersection would reopen, but recognized the significance of the moment and that this was a location of mourning and healing. We knew that the trust between the community and the city was broken and that we needed to be thoughtful on reestablishing a dialogue, and that could not be rushed. So for the first several weeks, the engagement team was intentional about being present, building relationships and working to reestablish trust. Although we knew many of the leaders already in the community, we also recognized that there were new people that were there, and many of these relationships had to be reestablished. Work at this time included attending meetings and simply listening. Not prompting conversations, but being present. The team attended the twice daily meetings on the street with the community organizers, attended a number of neighborhood organization meetings, block club meetings, and the meetings hosted by the council members as well. The team also brought back any operational needs to the operations team, which was housed in Public Works, and as Director Hutchinson mentioned, was actively responding to those logistical needs the entire time over the past several months. By the time we got to the week of July 27th, the engagement team began to switch to a more active engagement approach. We started to have conversations about the planning for the future of 38th and Chicago, and started introducing questions like, what is a good timeline for reopening? What are the viable considerations for the future? And what is the process to co-create the opening with the community? And that these ideas were starting to be introduced into the dialogue. In early August, the city more formally announced a partial reopening for the scheduled for the week of August 17th. Council members started to introduce the idea of a phased reopening at community meetings, and the engagement team also met with a number of community leaders to inform them of the city's intent to begin a phased reopening in mid-August. In response to the city's announcement of a phased reopening, community leaders authored a letter detailing a list of demands that need to be met before a phased reopening of 38th Street could commence. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a complicated situation. There have been many different groups working in the area, and the ideas of what happens next or what the long-term vision is for the intersection still remain uncertain. Though through the many meetings attended or held by council members, neighborhood organizations, and block clubs, residents, as well as input from 311 and 911, I have to report that it's been difficult to find any consensus about how to move forward. However, through the dialogue and the feedback, there are some common themes that we wanted to report back to you today. So this is what we've heard. There's a strong emphasis on seeing racial justice and equitable community development that serves historically marginalized BIPOC communities. There are strong concerns about public safety in the area. There are many different divergent opinions on what changes in street access may mean for public safety. Preserving space for mourning and to preserve the Living Street Memorial is important. The area of Chicago Avenue from the roundabout Fisk sculpture north of 38th Street is especially important. Connecting with the many artists who have contributed art to the area, as well as the arts organizations nearby, needs to continue and be supported. There's a need for expanded access, including access for the 5 and the 23 bus and less traffic on nearby streets. There's a desire for clarity on next steps in the short and longer term, including work related to a memorial honoring George Floyd. Questions about what winter means for the space, access, and the memorial are also present. And there are a range of ideas for reopening the street, from leaving it closed indefinitely to request to opening the street, fully reopening the street immediately. The engagement team, which has been at the on the street meetings over the course of the summer, has heard the most about leaving the intersection closed. Other conversations and feedback have expressed a desire to get the intersection reopened. So presently, staff continue to attend community meetings in the area. We've also created a website with the most current information and an email address, 38th in Chicago at minneapolismn.gov, and an online comment form so people have another way to share their feedback directly to the city. The email and website information is included on the last slide of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Director Hutchinson.
Thank you, Director Rubador. If we could go to the next slide, please. The barricades that are in place have been a source of protection and have also presented some challenges. It is important that we as a city maintain ADA access and that we support access to businesses in the area. Can you go to the next slide, please? The next slide shows a picture of emergency response to the site. This vehicle was able to access the intersection via the barricades at Park and 38th Street. This level of access is possible, but requires coordination to remove additional barricades placed by the community. You can go to the next slide, please. Our teams in traffic and in transportation maintenance have been stretching themselves pretty far to address the neighborhood impacts. This is an image of a temporary speed bump that has been installed. We've installed numerous of these in the neighborhood at the request to alleviate some speeding concerns, which is a byproduct of the traffic diversion. You can go to the next slide, please. You've heard this term, phased reopening. As a result of our recognition of the importance of the site, the breadth of community feedback, and the challenges, and recognizing fully there isn't a consensus of opinion, we have developed a phased plan for reopening. The city recognizes, we recognize that racial healing and justice must be at the forefront of our work. And we continue to commit to working with the community. We will continue to discuss specific elements and desires to support racial healing and community investment. And we understand the importance of preserving space for the George Floyd Memorial to support visitation and community activities. So at this time, we have only considered changes to 38th Street. And that is what we mean when we say phased reopening at this time. A phased reopening is based on the following principles. These are primarily developed by the staff who have been working with the community every day. So first, we want to provide space for mourning and reflection and demonstration, and this will require some changes to parking. Second, we want to preserve public art. The artistic expression in this intersection, it's a beacon to visitors, and we seek to preserve this expression if the community and artists desire it. We want to improve access for businesses, residents, transit, and emergency responders. And we want to reconnect neighborhoods. There are many homes that have primary access points on 38th Street, as do several businesses. We want to support continued community placemaking. The placemaking that's occurring in this area is pretty special, and we want to help capture and preserve that. We seek to reduce the impacts of the surrounding neighborhoods. We consider this an interim design, not a return to normalcy. The interim design will help preserve space now that can be translated into more permanent design in conjunction with community visioning. It's also the first time the city will have an opportunity to see how a roundabout works, so this design will be unique and potentially an indication of long-term viability. We do need to consider the challenges of winter, and we have concerns about our ability to service this neighborhood under the existing conditions. You can go to the next slide, please. As we think about 38th Street, we often use this as a focal point. I know that when I have been there, I certainly do. And so we are centering that. You can go to the next slide, please. Centering that in our concepts for a phased reopening. In our existing conditions, we have the placement of the current barricades are pretty far out of the intersection, and those are reflected by the red lines on the screen. You can go to the next slide, please. The team has developed a couple of different options for consideration. The first option is to reopen 38th Street only and preserve the roundabout, the community constructed roundabout, and the artwork, if the artist so desires, in the intersection. And you can go to the next slide, please. Just a bit more detail in there. You can go to the next slide, please. We also explored a second option, which moves the garden and the sculpture to the north. One of the benefits there is that we're able to preserve more of the memorial space that exists already on 38th Street. So that is what we mean when we say phased reopening. Thanks for advancing. I was about to say that. Nope, we're good. Thanks. Thank you. I want to turn now to our long-term commitments. Our work to date has also included, at the same time, it has included very short-term conversations. It has also included identifying opportunities for longer-term commitment. City leaders have met with community leaders who have authored that previously mentioned resolution outlining a series of demands to consider, and we are working through these items. Today, I'm going to highlight a number of efforts to demonstrate long-term commitment. This is by no means comprehensive, and I also want to recognize that Andrea Brennan, many of these items are led out of CPED, and she has joined us today for any follow-up questions that may occur. So just a few things. The council recently passed a resolution declaring racism, led a lot of leadership in there, and Council Vice President being among the leaders in that, a milestone moment for the city to have adopted that. Last week, the City Council designated 38th Street as one of the cultural districts. This really invests a lot, fuels economic growth in these areas. There are the new Commercial Property Development Fund is a tool that can help focus on economically challenged areas with respect to housing programs. You can go to the next slide, please. Last month, the City Council adopted a revised budget, which included $100,000 to support the initial community engagement for the co-creation of a vision for a permanent memorial for George Floyd. It also included $150,000 for the Creative City Making Program to hire a diverse team of artists and healers to create, and I believe there will be some attention at in this area. And you can go to the next slide. For the last couple of years, the city has been working, led by Community Planning and Economic Development, has been preparing the 38th Street Thrive Plan. This is still set for adoption, and city staff are working on a new preference policy. This brings more focused investment that includes the area of the 4 neighborhoods that converge at 38th and Chicago. And I want to talk also about the investment in the physical place here. First is, as you are all aware, the renaming of Chicago Avenue is working its way through the approval process. Second thing I'll highlight is that we have planned capital dollars in this area. We're working to accelerate that so that we can reconstruct Chicago and 38th Street in the vision that the community sets forward. That total is $4.7 million. We are also very much supportive of behind pushing as hard as we can on the Metro D-Line Bus Rapid Transit project. This is one of the most important transit investments that can be made in the city of Minneapolis, with 57% of the population within a half a mile of the route being people of color, and 44% within a half mile are low income. This is an investment in mobility for people. Again, not a fully comprehensive list, but we do want to highlight that we want to make long-term investments in addition to talking about shorter-term actions. As Director Rubador mentioned, there are opportunities for community input. I want to thank the communications team for putting this together. 2 ways. You can get information from the website and sign up to receive updates. You can also provide your feedback by emailing 38th in Chicago at minneapolis.gov. With that, I will end my presentation, and this team will stand for questions if you have them. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Director. Are there any comments from my colleagues or questions from council members? Council Vice President Jenkins.
First of all, I want to just really thank the outstanding team that has been assembled by Director Hutchinson, as well as Director Rubador and others for their continued engagement and just earnestly listening to community and being a part of those conversations. As Director Hutchinson mentioned, over 80 different meetings have been attended by city staff over the past, since June. And many of them I was a part of myself, and so I've witnessed staff engaging with our neighbors in that corridor, and just really want to thank them for their efforts. I really want to just acknowledge the community that is there day and night since May 25th and the tragic killing of George Floyd, which has erupted in unrest throughout the city of Minneapolis and throughout the country and throughout the world. And it has really unearthed the systemic racism that is inherent in our society, the deep structural challenges that continue to oppress communities of color to this day. Those combined with COVID-19 has really made this community of people of color, this historically African American community, deeply on edge, deeply challenged, and just exhausted from dealing with the daily challenges that racism imparts on communities. And so I want to acknowledge their commitment, their trauma, the pain that they are experiencing as a result of this incident that happened here in our city. I appreciate all of the background that Director Hutchinson laid out in terms of the efforts that the city has been taking to date, the potential process for a partial reopening. But I want to be clear that the issues around seeking justice are first and foremost in my mind and are very much front and center in this effort. And, you know, I want to say to the community members that may be listening in that we, the city, I, the Ward 8 representative, Councilmember Cano, representing the 9th Ward, are committed, and all of my colleagues are, which is why we are having this presentation today and planning for continued conversations and engagement around this issue in the future, that we are committed to bringing justice not only to George Floyd through developing a permanent memorial at this intersection, but to justice to our community by really addressing these deep concerns and asks that have been put forward in the justice resolution. But we want to be real clear that these things cannot happen overnight. The issues that have created these conditions did not occur overnight. They were centuries and decades in the making, and it's going to take equally, I think, concentrated effort. Certainly not centuries or decades, but we must be very diligent in planning how we disrupt these systems that continue to oppress communities and how we are going to redress the harms that have been done. And so, you know, I was elected to represent the Ward 8 community. However, I am under no illusions that I alone can go out and fix these challenges. I know for a fact that we must work together with community to bring these things to reality. And so I'm working together with Councilmember Cano to bring forward, which he referenced a little bit earlier, a resolution establishing a commission to discuss how we address justice, not only for the area surrounding 38th and Chicago, but for our entire city. These conversations impact the entire world, and we can no longer just continue to have sort of these private conversations and meetings with just a couple of city council members and a couple of neighborhood residents. The issues are much broader than that. And so we are trying to develop a process by which we can engage with community in a formalized manner to really work together to bring forward these issues and desires. I know that many people say we're tired of meeting, we're tired of discussing, but the reality is these issues cannot be resolved in a vacuum. We must work together to do this really important work to bring about justice in our communities. So to that end, we're bringing forward a resolution to establish a commission to move forward on this work. We will, at that point, set a public hearing to listen to community and hear their ideas and comments and concerns, and continue to work to move forward. In the meantime, we will be working on the short-term goals along with community to figure out how do we begin a stage and partial reopening for the very reasons that Director Hutchinson mentioned. You know, our city has been absolutely committed to the issues of racial justice since this council has formulated. And even prior to that, my predecessor, Councilmember Glidden, had already established a racial equity initiative in the city, and we've been able to move that work forward by adopting a strategic racial equity action plan, which incorporates racial equity into every decision that we make in the city of Minneapolis. We've developed a racial equity advisory committee to hold us accountable to those issues and concerns. We have a document, a form, the racial equity impact analysis, which will help us to understand how our policies are impacting vulnerable communities and identify ways that we can improve outcomes if we are not being as equitable as we possibly can. We adopted the 2040 plan that is intended to redress these issues. Many of the concerns that have been addressed in the justice resolution, the city of Minneapolis has already having in place. As was mentioned, we just adopted cultural districts, and 38th Street has always been a part of that conversation of being a cultural district, and that work has been going on for the past 5 years. It will include an opportunity for investing in businesses along the corridor. It will include opportunities for facade improvements. We are in the midst of working on a project called Minneapolis Forward, which will help to raise money to support small businesses recovering from the COVID crisis, as well as the uprisings and subsequent unrest and destruction of property in the city of Minneapolis. And certainly 38th and Chicago will be highlighted and a part of those efforts. So we are absolutely committed to bringing justice to our communities, and I look forward to working with everybody who is about achieving justice. And with that, I will turn it over to my other colleagues who may want to speak. And I want to thank you, Madam President, for helping to elevate this issue to the City Council and being willing to support the work of myself and Councilmember Cano. And I ask for the support of the rest of my colleagues as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Council Vice President. And I know that this intersection is near and dear to your heart, Council Vice President, having worked on investment here for many decades. You know, as we imagine the next phase of this space as a memorial, I know your leadership is so important, and you have our full support, I know, of this full council. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this presentation and getting to understand more of what's going on and being thought about here. And I come from this from the point of view that I really want to support my colleagues in the work that we're doing there. I also understand on a citywide level how important Chicago Avenue and 38th are in terms of circulation, bus routes, you know, helping people get connected and moved around. And it looks like really where we are moving is for some kind of a partial modified reopening to get traffic back on the streets. And I might have missed something, but I was curious if we'd done much of a deeper analysis, and conversely, if there's been much public requesting making it a permanent pedestrian plaza there, and what we learned when we looked at that. I mean, I'll also note, I'm supportive and interested in looking at how we can make some investments here to make something happen that will work to serve everybody in the city, but also particularly the people who live right in that area. Did we study how complicated and expensive converting it to a pedestrian plaza would be, and have we ruled that out completely? And is there a consensus around that decision in the community?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I will do my best to answer that question. It has been a mere couple of months since this has been in place. I will say that as we look at a long-term vision, I don't believe anything is off of the table, and I would encourage us as a city to think as creatively as we possibly can, also understanding how important D-line is to us. But we haven't done a full analysis because we would have done that in a vacuum by ourselves as a city, and we are fiercely committed to doing this in a co-creation process with the community, and we're looking forward to having more conversations about that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer and that clarity, and it would be a big undertaking, but appreciate it, and I can't wait to learn more about the resolution that's forthcoming and other ways that I can help as a council member for the second ward.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam President. Appreciate it. Appreciate your support in bringing this item forward. I'll say that you know, I've been seeing just the immense amount of engagement that is happening on this intersection. And I do, you know, echo Council Vice President Jenkins' gratitude to the many staff members who have made themselves available above and beyond regular work hours to receive this energy and to reflect it back and to help us figure out how to make sure that we're connecting all of these discussions, because I believe that we're truly more in alignment than what a nominal sort of surface look might lead one to think. A lot of the items included in the resolution from community members relating to demands about justice with the intersection, with the discussions of the reopening of the intersection, are things that the city has already been working on or is working on now, or can be very easily connected to the work that we're already doing around either abolishing our current policing system and or creating a new transformative model of public safety, as well as economic development and anti-gentrification work. There's a lot of overlap in many of these discussions, and I think the most pressing, I think, you know, challenge here is going to be, you know, how do we weave these needs and conversations and desires and wants together, and I sense that as sort of the most prominent you know, vein that needs to be really reconnected here, is that sense of togetherness is shared by different groups at different levels, but all of those groups are not necessarily in unison together, and they're very much all stakeholders of this intersection. I'm speaking about residents that live there. I'm speaking about business owners and nonprofit leaders who have grown roots in this community for more than 15 years. I'm talking about the folks who are now active there on the site and trying to respond to the daily needs of the area. And so there's a lot of care for this area. There's a lot of people that care about making sure things go well here. And I think our challenge as a city is trying to figure out how do we create that sense of togetherness between all those groups. So I'll just put that on as a radar on our radar there. And I do want to also acknowledge publicly the rich racial diversity of this node, in that it's such a unique place. Leaning on what Councilmember Jenkins said, as historically this being one of the neighborhoods, central neighborhood, where Minneapolis was able to elect the first African American mayor of the city, Mayor Sales Belton, and Central being one of her bases for that election victory. And so really looking at that history and bringing it together with the current status of the intersection, where we have arts organizations like Pillsbury House and Theater that have been there for many, many years, supporting the young folks in our neighborhood, to Setul, who does workers' rights organizing with low-income workers and low-wage workers across the city, to Wing Young Huey, who's been a part of the anchoring of that space for a long time, and being a mentor to many up-and-coming artists and social justice fighters. And so just looking at the sort of universe that is there, that's very richly unique and diverse, and ensuring that those folks don't get displaced or don't get pushed out by potentially new investment interests who are really looking to make this the next happening place, and we're not able to anchor those voices that have been there for so long. And so just being really careful and mindful of how that economic recovery and that healing and that restorative justice all play together in this intersection, so that we don't accidentally have unintended outcomes of displacement of communities of color, and the diverse voices that have made this place so strong for I think for and during difficult times. And I do want to say that we're trying really hard to think about how we build this this very public, legible vehicle of engagement that can drive a communal vision of what this community is and could be and should be. And of course, with Councilmember Gordon's comments about, could we make this like a Zócalo, where, folks are kind of walking by and there's street vendors, and it's more of like an activity that's outdoors for pedestrians, and sort of a community-based space that doesn't necessarily have to adhere to, the needs of cars and traffic and so forth, but it's more of a center or a district for revitalization anchored in centering the voices of justice for the African American community and the diverse communities that are there. We're going to need the funding. And so early on, I remember talking to our director here, Director Hutchinson, about how much money would it take to sort of rebuild this intersection and make it something different. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the time it was like $5 million. And so it's going to take a lot of resources to get the investment that this area is going to need to really uphold some of those needs and desires and that vision, that collective vision. And so we're gonna need help from our community, and we're gonna need help from foundations, and we're gonna need help from folks with wealth and resources to really support this area to come together. Number one, I don't think we can do this as a divided family. I don't think we can do this as a divided community. And if we can't get through that division, we're not going to be able to fulfill that potential. And so we're going to need help to bring people together. We're going to need help to create this vision, and then we're going to need help to raise the money to get that vision to come to become a reality. So our work is certainly cut out for us for the next weeks and months and years here. And I'm hoping that we can put together a structure that will carry us through that time and that journey. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of kind of more detailed logistical questions for staff. Dr. Hutchinson, can you remind us what's the current thinking on the implementation timeline for the D line in kind of a best case scenario, if you will, about the funding. And then could you also talk through the timelines related to the options that you showed us? Are those things that could be in place before the winter time, or was that more of a longer term post winter time idea?
Chair Bender, the question about D-line, I'm going to say something that I'm going to have to go and check and make sure it's totally accurate once we're done here. But the D-line is actually closer than we think, in that soon there is supposed to be some scheduled utility work to prepare for its arrival. 2021 is not far away. 2022, I believe, is when the project would be finished. So we should, assuming there is full funding for it, there's still, I believe, $45 million gap to close. But the funding is, assuming there's full funding, we would see activity in 2021, and I believe completion in 2022. When I referenced our acceleration of capital, it was so that we could match up the two, the capital investment from the city, as well as the investment made by Metro Transit, as well as any external funds, as Councilmember Cano noted, that we will continue to seek to augment what is possible here. On the options, we began really with 38th Street, and as Director Rubidor noted, we had considered a one schedule. We don't have dates now. I don't have a target date or week. That set of activities related to reopening 38th Street would take a couple of days to accomplish. Our plan was to then turn to more engagement about Chicago and what happens there. 38th Street gives us the best opportunity to meet some of the principles and the goals, creating a little more access, being able to maintain a little better for winter. So I don't have a full answer to the timing of all of the options, because we really had been focusing on 38th Street as that interim step. I do think it's thank you for bringing up winter. It's not the only part of the conversation. We know there's so much going on, but as sometimes as operational professionals, we're starting to look at winter right now. We're thinking about winter right now in public works, and we think about things like, would we be able to continue to serve anything that's closed in the same way? We think probably not. Still looking. And it does drive a little bit of the operational conversation. It's a neighborhood node, and we don't want it to ever feel like it's abandoned. So that's some of our thought process now.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? So it sounds like for next steps, there'll be some more thinking about kind of creating some more structure for the community engagement, and then perhaps a recommendation back to the council through a committee here before any decision is made. Does that sound right? I guess absent any sort of emergency situation.
Chair Bender, is that a question for me?
Yes, I think so, or Mr. Rubidor, or
I would welcome additional opportunities to explain our work, and I will work with yourself, Council President, as well as Council Vice President, as well as Chair Reich as we're transitioning back on additional steps.
Chair Bender, if I could, this is David Rubidor. And I also heard both Council Vice President Jenkins and Councilmember Cano talking about conversations more around a structured engagement process moving forward. So we'll be circling back with them. I'm looking forward to having conversations with them about what that looks like. And it sounds like that'll be coming back to the council as well.
Okay, thank you all.
On hold. Casey.
Anything further on this item? Seeing none, thank you to everyone who's taken part in this really important conversation, especially to those members of the community, the neighbors who live nearby, and folks who have come to participate in morning and action at the intersection. And I know my colleagues have been working so hard to engage all of these voices and to really balance all of the needs of the community. So extra thanks again to Council Vice President Jenkins and Council Member Cano. With that, I will direct the clerk to receive and file this report. And that brings us to our final item for today, which is a report from the Minneapolis Police Department regarding current operations, capacity, and plans. And this is in part in response to a kind of brief question and answer with Chief Arredondo at a recent council meeting. So thank you, Chief. I know I sent a lot of questions from council members. I wanted to make sure you had some sense of what kind of questions folks would have ahead of time. I anticipate some of those questions will take longer than we've had since last week when I sent them to answer, but we appreciate your time and look forward to hearing more about staffing levels in the police department, as well as all the other things going on. So welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. Thank you for having me. Madam Chair, again, I want to thank you for taking your time and diligence to gather the many questions. With that, and because some of the questions obviously require a great deal of more information that goes into them, I've actually conferred and reached out to, as discussed with our city clerk, to look at the calendar, the council calendar, and want to very respectfully propose a future study session date, and I believe September 15th would work if the Madam Chair and the council members so wish. But again, thank you, Madam Chair, for gathering those questions. I also want to take a moment to just give my thanks and support to our sworn and civilian team members of the MPD who just continue to work professionally, been very dedicated during these very unprecedented times. And as well, I want to acknowledge our many communities here in Minneapolis who've also over the last several months continue to be beacons of hope, continue to work on community safety, and continue to look after our elders and our youth in our community. So I'm very, very grateful to be a part of such a great city. Tech team, if I could have the next slide. Tech team, next slide, please. Yep. And I'm just checking in with our Madam Chair. Apologize for the pause here, but we'll take one moment to pause, I think, and we'll get on board here just shortly.
Chief, there's a slight technical challenge with the technical team, so they're working on that and we'll get it uploaded as soon as possible. I think you're ready to go.
Yes, so with that, Madam Chair, council members, I wanted to kind of incorporate many of the questions regarding our current state of public safety and crime in the city. And so I've kind of branched it off into these three buckets, if you will, immediate, near term, and long term. So I'll try to touch on all of those as we move forward in this public safety overview. Next slide, tech team. So this next information will focus on our MPD dashboard. We're looking at a 5-year comparison. Obviously, those things that I'm really making sure that we're focused on, obviously, homicides, gunshot wound victims, assaults, domestics, and robberies. And so, next slide. So where we're currently at today in our city of Minneapolis in terms of homicides, we're at 49, and this is as of August 18th. And so as you look at this slide, and I'm always mindful to bring to light that these are not just numbers. Obviously, these are loved ones who are no longer with us, and these are people who are mourning for their family members, they're grieving for them. So I don't want us to get just too focused in on just the numbers alone, but we can clearly see that 2020, and this is just again as of August 18th, that we have suffered 49 homicides year to date, and you can see over the 5-year span that number has increased exponentially. Next slide. And our gunshot wound victims over the course of the past 5 years, this number here also again is very staggering. Year to date here in 2020, or certainly for August 7th up until August 17th, we have received in Minneapolis 338 of our community members have received been victims of gunshot wound violence. And so you can see even as of last year in 2019, we ended the year with 184, which is still unacceptable, but you can see that we have too many guns out in our streets, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the dynamics that we're seeing that's taking place out there in our communities. But gun violence is certainly a concern, and it's something that I know that many stakeholders are working to try to prevent and reduce that. And I'll also talk about the important work and collaboration we've had with some of our other local, federal, state partners, but also right here within our city enterprise, the Office of Violence Prevention. Next slide. So our total accumulated aggravated assaults up until August 17th of this year, we're looking at 1,835. And again, the previous numbers from the years gone by, you can see that. Now the next slide is taking into account domestic aggravated assaults, and we're at 568. And I will also talk a little bit further into the presentation about intimate partner violence and how that impacts our communities as well. Next slide. Robberies are at 1,028 year to date, and you can take a moment to see that over the course of the past 5 years. Next slide. So what I will do now for our Madam Chair, to our council members, is take a look at each precinct, each of your wards, in terms of the precincts that cover your wards, and give you a look at what they're experiencing and what our inspectors are doing to address those public safety issues. So first slide, or next slide. So for the first precinct, what Inspector Peterson and his teams have been experiencing as it relates to that precinct. Vulnerable community members and those experiencing homelessness have been targeted and have been victims of crime. The first precinct has also seen aggravated assaults and robberies primarily along Nicollet Mall between 8th Street and Grant. First Precinct is also experiencing unlawful activity along the main public transportation stations, 5th through 8th Street along the Nicollet Corridor, and between 5th and 7th Avenue in Hennepin, 5th and 7th Street on Hennepin Avenue. Inspector Peterson's teams are seeing more youth and older adults engaged in narcotics dealing, and also the nighttime, how it transitions from day to night. The nighttime activities include robberies, narcotics, and shots fired. Next slide. Inspector Peterson has been focused on utilizing the work of the CERT team to combat the illegal handguns that they've seen in the First Precinct. He's also coordinating crime reduction details along with our partners, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, as well as with the Metro Transit Police Department and our other law enforcement partners. They've been teamed up with through the late night entertainment details with the Downtown Improvement District. Also continuing to do some good work utilizing cameras for crime prevention and apprehension of suspects, and have made some significant accountability arrests with that. And continue also to partner with the Office of Violence Prevention with the help of Mad Dads and Mother's Love. Second Precinct has been experiencing robberies of businesses, aggravated assaults, and burglaries of dwellings. How that transitions in terms of what they're seeing in terms of nighttime includes moped and motorcycle thefts, along with street racing and gun violence. Next slide. Inspector Loining's team over at the Second Precinct are addressing it through robbery suppression details focused in the Marcy Holmes area. Also utilizing their crime prevention specialists for informational notifications to neighbors, and that information being placed on the website Nextdoor. Have utilized the community service officers, distribution of vehicle theft prevention placards. Second Precinct squads are also conducting alley patrols, and the precinct personnel attends regular neighborhood meetings and distributing crime alerts and advisories. Next slide. The Third Precinct, under the leadership of Inspector McGinty, what Third Precinct has been seeing year to date has been robberies, carjackings, gun violence, and while those experiencing homelessness are in no way at all is that criminal, but there has been some unique things associated with some of the encampments that took place or that are taking place this year in terms of whether they've been preyed upon and becoming victims of crime, and some of the other things that have spilled out into those neighborhoods surrounding where some of those encampments were at. Next slide. Inspector McGinty's teams have utilized coordinated crime suppression details. They've been utilizing their CERT and BERT teams, community response teams, as well as our bicycle rapid response teams to address some of the issues that they've been experiencing at Third Precinct. Many of you know, Madam Chair and council members, the U.S. Attorney here has started along with, in partnership with the Minneapolis Police Department, a federal task force to do both, not only utilize intelligence to go after those who would commit harm in our communities, but also for prosecution purposes, and teamed up with our MPD weapons team for assistance in going after those who are also bringing guns into the community. And we've been utilizing our livability in terms of utilizing our homeless outreach teams to help those who are experiencing homelessness and to also provide them some safeguards for that. And Third Precinct as well is also teamed up with the Office of Violence Prevention and utilize Mad Dads and Mother's Love. The Fourth Precinct has been experiencing this year issues involving around group violence. The gun violence has also been seen in the Fourth Precinct, as well as narcotics and drug cells. Been complaints of prostitution, and from community members also about reckless and erratic vehicle patterns in the Fourth Precinct. Next slide. Inspector Pulfus has been utilizing our GET teams to do details, also utilizing the Fourth Precinct CERT team to combat and reduce and prevent some of this violence, as well as our partners with Office of Violence Prevention, our group violence intervention team, GVI. We've also been leaning on the help of our federal task force, as well as, again, partnering with the Office of Violence Prevention and utilizing the skills of Mad Dads and Mother's Love. 5th Precinct, under the leadership of Inspector Huffman. 5th Precinct has experienced robberies, burglaries, youth involved in criminal activity. And the 5th Precinct, they've seen a shift, certainly with the COVID and many of the bars and restaurants that were typically operating in Uptown. What they've seen in terms of the nighttime has been some gun violence, assaults, and drag racing. Inspector Huffman has organized and coordinated detail patrols, has been working with the Uptown Association and nightlife business owners, have been doing combined details with other precincts as well in specialty units, and have also utilized the help from Office of Violence Prevention with Mad Dads and Mother's Love. Madam Chair, council members have asked about a snapshot in time, what our staffing in terms of patrol staffing looks like right now. And as you can see from this slide, the numbers here with the inspectors listed, the number of inspectors listed, lieutenants, sergeants, and officers. And again, I want to just emphasize this is just for our sworn patrol staff. Next slide. So what does that breakdown look like to date this year for our 5 precincts? And again, there really has never been a where we give each 5 of the 5 precincts the exact same amount of personnel. And so you can see from this map here, though, as of 2020 this month, what that percentage of staffing looks like for each precinct. 1st Precinct accounts for about 22%. 2nd Precinct about 16%. 3rd Precinct 21%. The 4th Precinct 23%, and 5th Precinct 18% of that 438 of sworn. There are many questions surrounding response times, and because there is a lot of information, Madam Chair, council members, that goes into many of the questions that were raised regarding that, I think it would be preferred to really go in depth on that, perhaps during the study session that was proposed for September 15th. So for the near term, Madam Chair, council members, I will be looking at and working with our leadership teams and reevaluating our successful crime strategies, successful crime reduction and prevention strategies as we're moving along here for the near term. Also, it's very important for myself and our teams to receive that community input that continues to be very vital in shaping what our response can look like and what are the best needs that the community would like to see from us in that regard. And then, of course, continuing to build upon our relationship with the Office of Violence Prevention. The partnership of the Office of Violence Prevention has really been so important over the last several years. They have helped us as the Minneapolis Police Department to really look at some of these issues in our communities. Go back. They've really helped us to look at some of these issues in our communities as through a public health lens, which has been very important. Madam Chair, I know that Councilmember Cunningham, for example, has really done so much in terms of bringing to light the impacts associated with intimate partner violence and how that really can play out in terms of what ultimately looks like public safety, but also how that can harm our communities, and we have to address that. He's been a stalwart in making sure that we're addressing that also from the youth, and when children are experiencing that from a young age, if it's not addressed with, and if the tools and resources are not addressed right away, that can carry out into folks going down a path that we don't want to see. And so appreciate his efforts in that. Also, group violence intervention, GVI has played a very important role in how we're not just using the enforcement piece to how violence is being played out in our communities, but utilizing folks who've had experience in working with young people, particularly young men who've been involved in group violence, being able to offer up resources for them, whether they're trying to change their life around, get out of that life, whether it's getting education, a GED. Housing is so very important in a lot of these discussions, mental health services, and employment, jobs. And so it's a two-tier track. We have to make sure that we are holding our folks accountable, keeping our community safe. But GVI has also played a significant role in trying to help reduce some of the violence here that we've seen in our communities. We've also utilized OVP in terms of using some of the wonderful groups such as Mad Dads, Mothers Love to help de-escalate incidents of community unrest. And we've utilized them throughout our city, and we continue to be thankful for their work in that. And then also Director Cotton, under all of that umbrella, she has done a phenomenal job and also helping to form spaces for good community engagement, how we can work together, build relationships, build that trust, and so that's been very important. Next, I'd like to talk about data. Data was something, Madam Chair, that many of the council members had also brought up, and the important role that plays. Firm believer that, and I've always called it from the beginning, that it's the people's data, and that data must tell our story, good or bad. We have to be very transparent, be very authentic, and be very real in that. The role of the MPD should be to send our data to our city IT department, and that they make that accessible to our communities. We need to have as much of a hands-off approach to that, provide that under the great leadership of our Director Fahil, and make sure that his teams get that, and that they're working constantly on providing good products, good user-friendly products for our community members and our council members, to make sure that they have, and all of you have, that real-time data to help guide and inform your decisions as it relates to public safety as well. And so we're very thankful for our partnership with the city IT. So long-term, current pre-planning safety measures are taking place right now with our leadership teams into 2021. Certainly we're looking at trends and dynamics that we're experiencing through 2020 and really trying to see how we can do a good job in terms of reduction, prevention of some of these crimes that we're seeing this year, and so that we can look towards next year and do all we can to reduce what we've seen, the numbers that we've seen over the course of the past year. We're examining MPD resources for the best efficiency of operations. We've been doing that over the course of the last year, and we'll continue to keep doing that. Partnering with IT to create and expand our transparent and user-friendly community dashboards, and that will continue to be ongoing. And as well, continuing to partner with OVP to support alternatives to policing that fosters community safety. And I'm very appreciative of the work that Director Cotton has been doing and leading in that charge. Madam Chair, as I mentioned, wanted to respectfully offer up a study session next month if Madam Chair and the Council sees that available, but I wanted to give a snapshot of kind of where the city is in terms of public safety. So with that, I'll yield my time.
Thank you, Chief. And I sent a note to the clerk. I'm sure we'd all be very interested in hosting a longer deep dive into staffing levels and other related items. So I'll just confirm that date with the clerk as we're working to adjust our structure, as I think everyone knows. I've been talking about that for a while, to better organize our work. So I think that date is correct. That second Tuesday, September 15th, would be a time that we're looking to hold for study sessions in the structure that we'll be in September. So I'm seeing some council members jump in with questions or comments. Councilmember Gordon.
And I'm not sure, but I think Councilmember Cunningham was before me in the chat. But I can go ahead while you guys looked at and see if it still makes sense. Oh, okay. He says nope.
I think he's just making some technical comments on the slides.
I get it. Sorry about that.
Thanks.
I have just a really specific question, and so there was a little request at the last council meeting. We're trying to look into how we're doing business licensing, and we've been looking at business conditions that are requiring off-duty officers to work there, and we're trying to get more flexible on that. And then we heard from business licensing that they're not really sure about how many officers are being hired and working off-duty for other clubs out there as well. And we're interested in finding that number if we could, and I don't know how if you can access that or not, and I'm sure a written report would be really helpful if you could help us figure out who might be tracking that in the department, or you could bring that back at some future time. But I just wanted to highlight it. I think I can send you the formal language if you haven't seen it, but it was a request and a vote we took last council meeting.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, to your question, that was actually, that question was raised during our MPD off-duty task force, which both Councilmembers Palmisano and Fletcher are part of, and that exact question in terms of trying to drill down in terms of the actual number of officers at any given time during the year are at some of these businesses working in that capacity. And so I know that is something that we're trying to get some answers for as well through the off-duty task force. So hoping to get that answer for you.
Do officers have to inform you when they're working off duty somewhere?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Gordon, yes, they do. There is a protocol in place to do that. Some of the nuance to that has been, just to simplify it, some of the nuance has been that if I'm the coordinating officer in charge of a large event, I may notify, obviously, that I'm going to be working that, and there may be 10 officers working that, and how those officers, those 10 officers under my direction. So there's just in how that's recorded. So there's some nuances to that in terms of how we have to capture that. But so that's what exactly the question you raised, the off-duty task force, that we're going to look into try to capture that.
Can officers go out and make side, if I could, can officers just go out and make side deals on their own? We read in the paper recently about an officer who was getting paid in cash for providing off-duty services. Or do they have to work through somebody in the department to get an off-duty job, let's say at a nightclub?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Gordon. So an officer, an individual employee, an individual officer certainly could arrange a security contract with a licensed business. I think that is key. That business still would have to be licensed through the city. That officer, once that arrangement was made, would still have to obviously do those same protocols of notifying when he or she is working on the site. And again, those are also questions that the off-duty task force with the leadership of Councilmembers Palmisano and Fletcher are heading. Those are some of the same things that we're discussing. But yes, to your question, they could certainly do that.
Thank you. And maybe before we're done, we can get some indication maybe from the council members when they think that work will be ready to report out to the council or the city too. Thank you, Madam President. I'll try and be quiet now.
No, thank you, Councilmember, for those questions. And I know there was also a news report about that work group, but I had understood it was still meeting. So maybe we could pause and just get an update on that task force and an answer to Councilmember Gordon's question as best we know about when the outcomes might be ready from that task force related to off-duty work, either from you, Chief, or from Councilmember Palmisano and Fletcher.
Madam Chair, I saw that I wanted to be respectful of Councilmember Palmisano if she wanted to make a comment regarding that.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I do see she's in queue now. Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, there are some things omitted from what people may have read in the paper this morning. The first is we absolutely are still meeting. We had a meeting even, I think it was last week. that was the off-duty work group meeting. Councilmember Cano's office is also part of those conversations, but importantly, it's not that we intentionally hit pause on progress through this work group. Last week we spoke about how others have changed policies and what that has meant and how they were able to bring about changes and for what reasons to off-duty work in their own jurisdictions. One of the challenges that really, we kicked off this work, we had an aggressive time schedule. We really wanted to have information back, recommendations back by June of this year. And then with the COVID pandemic, a lot of the people that we would be seeking to speak to, meaning nightclub owners, people that use downtown off-duty officers, were trying to save their own shirts, right? There's virtually zero off-duty work going on except for security of vacant buildings, essentially. And so it was just so outside the norm, and it just so was a different kind of operation than normal that we had to give people that space to go and figure out the more urgent thing in front of them. We also wanted to survey police officers who were users of off-duty and who did not choose to do off-duty work about some of their ideas and thoughts on how some changes would go. And again, as I think you've seen on previous slides and from the chief, our whole city and the needs of our police force have also taken a significantly different turn. First, in response to emergency 1, the global pandemic, and then second, the civil unrest following the murder of George Floyd has just created an inability to really be able to focus on this. One of the things that I do want to share that we discussed and people, I think it's fair to say there was consensus last week, was that given that people have, that off-duty is way down from what is typical at this time of year, we do want to be able to put recommendations in place before we go back to, let's just say we are going back to a normal where downtown nightclubs and that are open at full capacity again and special events and that type of thing. We want to make these changes so that as things open up again and we get to enjoy life in person together again, that we have these other recommendations in place. I don't know when that will be. We will be looking to schedule another work group if it's not already scheduled sometime in the next few weeks. And so we'll look to get this back on track as soon as is practicable, given all the different stakeholders involved.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I failed to mention the leadership of Councilmember Cano, who's also been a part of the off-duty work group from the beginning.
Thank you all. And that was very helpful. Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano, for the update in more detail. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Council President. I've got a couple of questions. First, Chief, thanks for being here and really appreciate the offer for the study session. Really look forward to getting more of our questions answered there. The first question I have, you mentioned that the CRT teams were helping out in a number of precincts, and I was told by the inspector and by the crime prevention specialist that we do not have a CRT team operating in the 3rd precinct. Could you clarify that a little bit?
So, Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader, my understanding is at least to date, 3rd Precinct CERT is still active. And so if that has changed, I will check with Inspector McGinty. And then your second question, I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, and to follow up, I have an email from last week. And this was an ongoing saga of trying to get someone to help out with kind of a problem property that was going on. I was retold repeatedly that the 3rd did not have a CRT team to help out. So, but on my, and I look forward to hearing more about that. My next question, I just wanted to have a little bit more clarity what successful crime reduction strategies are. And because council does not have oversight of you, it is just up to the mayor and yourself. Could you also include what metrics you and the mayor are looking at to come to that conclusion?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Schrader. So some of the successful crime strategies that we will look at and some of the things that we've had in place, for example, our weapons team. There's been many conversations by many community stakeholders, including some of the council members, oftentimes looking at how do we reduce the gun violence in our communities, and how do we also tend to go after those folks that are bringing those guns in. Through the work of our weapons teams, our GET teams, we recently, our weapons team made a significant arrest of a individual who's selling guns out of his trunk of his car, very new high caliber type of weapons, teaming up with the U.S. Attorney's Task Force and being able to look at federally charging that individual. So those are measured in successful crime reduction strategies by utilizing force multipliers in that sense. So that's one way of doing it. The other successful strategies, quite frankly. Now, this has been a year where we've seen certainly some increases in the gun violence, but I will say that the work over the past few years of the GVI teams, that has been helpful. We have seen, for example, last year, we were seeing that it was really taking hold of getting out to those groups and having those call-in sessions through Director Cotton's teams, through her folks on the ground who are working with those folks to reduce some of the group violence. And so those are just a couple of the ways that have been successful that we want to continue to measure that success. But make no doubt about it, Minneapolis, like other cities around the country, have been experiencing an increase in violent crime. And so we want to do everything we can to reevaluate what's worked, what we need to do differently, and again, see about utilizing that for 2021.
And thank you. I think I'll reserve my questions for later. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. We have Council Vice President next.
And thank you, Chief Arredondo, for this presentation today. I just wanted to really, offer up my support to you personally, as a leader in the city of Minneapolis, and the leader of the Minneapolis Police Department, and just acknowledge the extraordinary stress that you are under and the department as a whole, in really trying to help keep Minneapolis a safe community in these really extraordinary times. So know that you have my support, and want to lift up your leadership. I do want to just please bring more attention to this intersection at 38th and Chicago. We have continued to experience gun violence, robberies, as you noted in your report of the 3rd Precinct, carjacking, etc. And with the 3rd Precinct gone and people working out of the convention center now, and hopefully in this more seeming somewhat suitable situation coming up, that we continue to focus efforts at 38th and Chicago and really help to ease some of the tensions that are happening there. And also wanted to just ask, the CPS, I think Councilmember Schrader talked about this a little bit, but we don't have a CPS position in the sort of western part of Ward 8, southwest portion of the 3rd Precinct. And do you know if there's any plans to rehire for that position, or should we just rely on Sean Tillman, who I know already has a pretty large area to cover? But do you have any thoughts about that?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, first of all, thank you for your words of support. I also want to say that thank you to you and both. When it comes to 38th in Chicago, you and both, Councilmember Cano, I know, have been working tirelessly to not only try to address the concerns of your constituents and in that central neighborhood area, but also really your questions, your concerns, your asks of certainly me as chief, to how we can continue to keep that neighborhood safe has been very important in helping me to inform how we best go about that. I do know that for 38th in Chicago, Inspector McGinty and his teams continue to meet with the community, the neighbors over there. I know that there were concerns of neighbors just regarding whether it was response times or feeling though they're not seeing any police over there. I was happy that during the last, when you hosted Council Vice President Jenkins, your community town hall specific to central neighborhood, officers are getting in there, they're seeing them, the community seeing them, and we want to continue to make sure we do that. We want to be seen and be in there and really continue to work hard for our community. The crime prevention specialist that you had mentioned, my understanding is that that position, and I believe we even went through the hiring process for that person, but my understanding is due to the hiring freeze, that had been kind of put on hold for now. And so I believe that Inspector McGinty is probably utilizing the wonderful CPS Sean Tillman to kind of take on some of that. But I do know that that position was in the process, but I believe because of the budgetary matters with hiring freeze, it's been placed on hold.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Cano next.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you so much, Chief Madaria Arredondo, for briefing us and for sharing information about your efforts. I wanted to express that I fully acknowledge the difficult moment that we are in with our city employees and the uncertain future that some folks might feel because of the conversations we're having as a city. And I acknowledge that our officers are human beings and that they are impacted by the things they read on in the newspapers and the things they hear on television and the comments that we make here. So I know that the work of our police department is not your work alone, and that there are a lot of dynamics at play. And so I think a lot about that difficulty, and I know that it's not easy to keep the train running on time when there's so much turbulence happening throughout the community in so many different ways. And frankly, that's one of the primary reasons why I supported having our 3rd precinct personnel removed from the headquarters, because it was such a difficult time for so many people, and I wanted to be close to my family, and I would only imagine officers would also want to be close to their family during a time of loss and a time of grieving, such as what we experienced with the death of Mr. Floyd. So I also want to express my support to you. I've gone on public media many times to express that I believe you are the best chief of police in the country. And I know that Councilmember Palmisano and I many times have been worried that you would be recruited away somewhere, but we hope that you can of course, stay here with us in this big moment of transition where leaders like yourself, I think, have a very good opportunity to really bridge a lot of conversations and really bring forward a new system of public safety. And I don't think that you are by any means, in my mind's eye, excluded from that work, as it unfolds for the next days and weeks and months and years to come. I also want to echo Councilmember Jenkins's question about the crime prevention specialist. That is a position that I know in the 3rd precinct south of Lake Street, we used to have Karen Notch serve as the crime prevention specialist, and during the height of the needs around the encampments at Powderhorn and throughout South Minneapolis, you know, it would have been nice to have had a crime prevention specialist to lean on. And I know that the Callie Pliego, who's the crime prevention specialist for North of Lake in the 3rd precinct, she carries a very, very busy portfolio, and really this is the time where I believe community members are doubling down on their requests to those specific people, precisely because they're not officers. And so it feels a little bit more safe. It feels a little bit more, you know, politically correct to kind of reach out to those folks. And so I would encourage you, if at all possible, to seek that waiver and to try to get that position filled. I don't know if it's the same one, the one that Councilmember Jenkins mentioned in her ward. It's probably different ones because I think we have different precincts. So I know for us, the crime prevention specialist in the south of Lake area or sector used to be Karen Notch. She was very, very busy, of course, and now that she's gone, I think people would really welcome that that voice back into the community. And lastly, I'll just offer myself as a sounding board to you, and as a source of you know, not per se oversight, you know, because of the way that the charter is written, but certainly collegiality and respect from one leader to another, especially as leaders of color. I think that, you know, the expectations for us are double in what we're supposed to do in this moment. With our communities, who most of them who are negatively impacted by acts of police involved shootings and brutality are people of color. So you know, I hope that over the years you've seen my work with you in integrity and respect, and that hasn't changed. Of course, what has changed is that, you know, my ward is now literally breaking, and so my time is very, very limited. So I haven't been able to be as involved with our MPD leadership as I used to be, and with our officers as I used to be. We used to do door knocks in the neighborhood and things like that. And I don't think we need to stop that kind of work. I actually sense that there are many people in my community who want to get to know our officers, who want to get to know them by name, who want to feel that human connection and better understand how can we all work together, because we all know that, you know, we're going to be in this moment of transition for a while, and certainly we don't want to create further divisions by distancing ourselves from one another, instead just seeking to better understand each other's reality. And so I can serve as a liaison to you to connect with folks on the ground here in my ward who are interested in getting to know our officers from a very human perspective, who are interested in asking questions and seeking to understand and expressing their needs in a more clear way. So I just wanted to say, you know, I acknowledge the time that we're in, and I acknowledge that this isn't for you alone to lift and do, and that I'm signing up for the work, and that we would love our crime prevention specialist back. So thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cano, so thank you for your very supportive words. As your chief, you know, I'm so blessed to have so many dedicated sworn and civilian men and women who come to work each and every day to try to do their best to uplift our city. And as many of your team members have, they too have as well have been working under some very unprecedented situations and circumstances, and they also, I have to be mindful too that their families come to work with them every day, and so I'm so grateful for their continued service. I know that they've been placed with so much stress, uncertainty, and yet they still continue to show. I'm very mindful too of the letters of thanks and emails that many in your wards have expressed for our men and women who continue to show up and provide that service and try to keep them safe. And so we need, but we're, you know, in order for us to move forward and to have those important conversations, to talk about the pain, and to, more importantly, to look at ways of healing and that pathway forward, it is going to take all of us. And if we're going to ever achieve that, it's going to take all of us together to work towards that. And so I appreciate, Councilmember Cano, your words in wanting to be in that space, and I know that you have. I know that all the council members want that as well. And so we'll continue to be there to show up and be seen and to do that. As far as your messages or your comments regarding the crime prevention specialist, you're right. There's more than just the one position that the council vice president mentioned. And again, I know there's some budgetary implications to that, but I will, after our presentation, I will check in terms of where that is in terms of the hiring waiver in that process. But thank you again.
Thank you. So I apologize to Councilmember Cunningham, who I skipped in the queue. So Councilmember Cunningham is next.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Chief, for being here, for being a part of the conversation with the council. It means a lot to have you here. There are a couple of things that I first want to name before I dig into some questions. The first is that I too want to name my support. You know this, but there is a narrative out there that we as a city council don't support you, and I hope that you know that that is not true. And that I respect and support you as a leader. I think you're a critical leader during this time. And I think that we can also hold multiple truths. Like, it's possible to support you and also recognize that you alone cannot enact major structural changes in a system that you inherited without the kind of broader support that you need to have. So I think it's true for us to hold multiple truths, that we can support you and have your back and respect you as a leader, as well as be in process around reimagining public safety and where policing fits into that. And in fact, I think those two things really go hand in hand, because we really cannot reimagine public safety and operationalize that in particular regards to policing unless we're supporting your leadership to do so and your vision. And so I just want to first name that. I also want to give a special shout out to some of the folks from the 4th Precinct that I've been working with. We've been having a very significant challenge on the 3200 block of Logan and Lowry, where we have had pretty much layer upon layer of social issues in a microcosm on this block, where we're having shootings every single night. And, you know, as many folks in our community know, it's not only that block, so there's a lot of challenges that we're having, but this is a particularly concentrated area. We are, so I've been organizing a collaborative effort to be able to address the challenges, because we have sex trafficking happening both of women and girls, we have drug dealing, we have gun violence, we have mental health issues like drug addiction, like substance abuse disorder, excuse me, like all of that on one block, extremely concentrated. And so Sergeant Alice White has been amazing to work with. I deeply appreciate her and her leadership, as well as Lieutenant Barnes. Both of them have been consistently showing up and being 100% involved. One of the folks, actually, we just had an arrest of one of the ongoing very violent drug dealers on that block, and who was wanted for a murder in another part of the ward. So I'm very grateful for the leadership and the role that enforcement plays in this collaborative effort. So I just want to name again that this is a comprehensive approach, and that law enforcement plays a role within that. So to get to my question, so I just want to kind of name those high level truths and realities and express my gratitude to both you and the folks over at the 4th Precinct. So I want to hear from your criminological perspective, your expertise. Why have we seen this increase in gun violence? I mean, this is a very exponential growth of homicides and gun shooting victims. So can you speak to some of the factors that are underlying this rather shocking increase?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, first and foremost, thank you again for your supportive words and also acknowledging the wonderful leadership folks over there at the 4th Precinct, and I couldn't agree with you more on Lieutenant Barnes and Sergeant White under the leadership of Inspector Polfus, and so I appreciate you mentioning them as well. That is your question as to what is different that we're seeing this year in 2020 with the number of the increase in gun violence specifically as opposed to previous years. I will say that the very same question that you've posed, many of the major city chiefs around the country, we've been asking that same question. It is very significant that it is very different this year. I think some of the things that we've talked about that could be factors in this. One, it's clear that I think most of the major cities across the country, we had been experiencing that gun violence the tail of last year. And I think when you add on certain things of the pandemic, that I think plays a role into it. We also know that when our country shut down its borders during COVID-19, the borders to the south of Mexico and the borders to the north, I think that interrupted some of the narcotics that were easily flowing. And so I think that there's probably been, to some extent, some that has agitated the market in our country. And I think we saw some, or I think we're seeing some of that has played out in cities across the country, including Minneapolis. We have also, and I think that at least the preliminary data is showing that for many major cities across this country, after May 25th, obviously marking Mr. Floyd's death, violence has gone up in some of these major cities. And I've heard sociologists talk about particularly young people experiencing pain, feeling hopelessness, anger, resentment, all of those sorts of things that you know, when you mix in guns and freely accessible weapons in our communities, that can have a tendency to play out in things that harm our communities. The economy. The economy is one where obviously you as our city elected officials are seeing that firsthand and having to deal with that and the repercussions of that. That I think it has been a perfect storm of sorts. I think that has added to that. And we're also in the midst of summer, which we typically in cities across this country see an increase in crime. So that is a very powerful question. Many of my chief colleagues across this country are trying to get a hand on that. But one thing is for sure, 2020 has been very different in the sense that we've seen these spikes. And so even talking to individuals who have kind of been in the life have also said, this is a different year. It's a different time. And so I think it's a combination of all those things, and you know, us having to bring in federal task force, and we're not the only city across the country that's done that. And so we're just trying to do, and I'm trying to make sure I'm working with our folks to do the best we can to utilize and leverage all of those resources to prevent, reduce. As Councilmember Schrader's question was about what are some of those successful strategies, holding on to those that we're seeing that's work, reevaluating the ones that aren't. And seeing how we can move forward. And so, yeah, I hope that answers some of it.
Absolutely. Madam President, if I may follow up.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So no, I really appreciate that additional context too, around it is not Minneapolis in a bubble that is experiencing this increase. I think that because of the fact we're feeling it so acutely, it can kind of cause that bubble feeling of like, this is happening just to us. But we have seen this across the country in major cities, and now we've seen it a little bit higher in Minneapolis. And I think that really, to your point, I appreciate you bringing up the like sociological perspective of like we do see some correlation. Now, correlation isn't causation, but we do see some correlation between when there is police violence and an uprising that happens, no matter really the scale of it. We see a spike in crime, that violent crime that happens afterwards. So, you know, I think that's something that we really have to kind of keep our eye on, because I think there's some potential association with a decrease in trust in law enforcement. And so, you know, I think that all of this is super helpful to know, so that I can also communicate that to my constituents. I do think that there also is a necessary change management approach that we as a council have to take into consideration when we are talking about, thinking about, and going through the process of reimagining, because even now nationally there is still the message out there that we have voted to abolish the police, and so, like, you know, I think that that's also our responsibility to think about how are we thinking about that and managing that change, and including police, the rank and file police leadership in bringing folks along. I do just want to also really appreciate the fact that you brought up GVI. GVI has been working, and we are in an anomalous situation right now in which you can't throw it out saying, oh, see, it doesn't work. Like, it has made a difference, and we've seen that in the numbers. And we just, like you said, have this awful perfect storm that has happened in which all of these factors are falling together or crossing paths at the same time. Two things, and then I will pass back to my colleagues. So I think that it's going to be really critical. I just want to reiterate in this space as we operationalize the cure violence model, because what that does for folks to be able to understand is that really gets ahead of the gun violence itself. It's folks who are you know, out of the life, maybe 1 foot in, 1 foot out, have the credibility, the level of influence with the folks who are shooting the guns to put them down. One of the things that I appreciate about that is multi-layered. Obviously, it saves lives, it disrupts the cycle of retaliatory violence, but it also unburdens our police officers as well. Because if we are having folks disrupt it before it pops off, then officers are not having to respond in the aftermath of multiple shootings, right? And so I think that, like, we have to think about all of these pieces and how they fit together, that it's actually helping to unburden our police with having to go from call to call to call and just responding for when there are gunshot victims, but being able to, like, really to dig in. So and do more of that community building piece that you frequently talk about. And also, I want to just speak very quickly. Thank you for also acknowledging my constant discussion of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. I just also want to just kind of name that number. While it's down, there is a belief amongst intimate partner, family violence advocates and specialists and folks who do the work, that the reason why the numbers are down across the country is because folks have been sheltered in place with their abusers, and they have had nowhere else to go. COVID has also been a mechanism of control. So, for example, no, you can't leave the house because you're going to expose me then to COVID. So it's like that. So the numbers are down more than likely because people are unable to call for the kind of help that they've been doing. I also want to give a quick shout out to the domestic violence community navigator, CC Rude, who is amazing. She's basically a one-woman department doing phenomenal work. So I'm grateful for that. And then the last thing is I would really like to also talk to get some data at some point about property crimes. Because I just know that we have some challenges in the 4th Ward around property crimes. And so I'm just curious about that so that I can have more of a informed conversation about that. So thank you for the space, everyone. Thank you, Chief, for being here. We've got your back. We appreciate you. And I will pass the floor back. Thank you, everybody.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you so much for your very supportive words and as well acknowledging some of our great folks who are doing great work up in the 4th Precinct. And of course, I couldn't agree with you more about Miss Cece and her important work on advocating for victims of domestic violence, and of course your leadership in that charge as well. To your question about again, we get tied up sometimes in the numbers, whether it's homicides, whether it's assaults, and what have you. And you've mentioned the CURE model and even GVI. And one thing that as chief I will tell everyone is that arrests alone do not remove the trauma. And so we certainly want to make sure that we're holding folks accountable for harm in our communities, but the arrest alone does not remove the trauma. And so that is something that after the crime occurs, our communities are still impacted by. And so any sorts of collaboration and partnerships that we can have as a city that can help prevent that from occurring, I will tell you that the Minneapolis Police Department, we certainly want to do that. I don't want to keep our homicide detectives busy. I don't want to keep our robbery teams busy, our assault teams busy. We know that crimes are going to occur, but anything that we can do as a city to reduce the harm, to reduce the violence, to increase community safety, we certainly want to play a role in that. And we'll definitely can make sure that you get the property crimes data that you requested. Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Johnson was next. I'll just see.
Oh, sorry about that, Madam President. I think I was muted there.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Councilmember.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Chief, for being here. I do have to say it's pretty refreshing to have you at these meetings regularly. I know that we've had you here on a number of council meetings since we've gone virtual due to the states of emergencies. And I think for me, at least, and I'm guessing it's probably similar for a number of colleagues, it's been a way to reconnect with the department in a way that's really helpful. I think that there's less of a connection there because of the lack of policymaking authority in the city charter. Personally, that's what I feel, at least. And I think that this is helpful and a good way to stay in touch on these issues. I think you probably have about the most challenging job in the city right now, and I want you to know that I appreciate you and respect you. I'm rooting for your success and MPD's success in both improving public safety and in achieving transformational change. I'm committed to continuing to be a supportive partner and continuing to offer encouragement and to share ideas. I know I have a number of questions that are really from community, and I was wondering if we could hopefully get through these. These are things that are coming up very frequently with constituents. So it sounds like 911 calls continue to be fully staffed. Is that correct? And I should say patrols for responding to 911 calls.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Johnson, yes, thank you. That is correct.
Excellent. Thank you. What steps are being taken to plan for the possibility of additional civil unrest once the trial results are announced? Obviously, the trial actually has to start first, but I know that's a frequent concern I hear from constituents.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Johnson and our council members, rest assured that we have been in planning and preparation for potential civil unrest, whether that's looking at the post-trial verdict, or whether that's even, quite frankly, individuals who might want to express themselves in some way or shape with the upcoming election in November. So but we're constantly planning. We certainly are in preparation and planning for those types of events should they occur, and we'll continue to do so. Yeah. Thank you, Chief.
I've had a number of residents reach out and say they're concerned around speculation of work slowdowns. What's your response to that?
Madam Chair, to Council Member Johnson, in previous council meetings, I believe there's been some conversations surrounding that. To date, I have not heard of any of those. I've not heard of any of our inspectors out at the precincts who have seen that. We are not seeing anything in terms of that would alert us to that there's some sort of slowdowns or what have you. And so as I present this to you today, that is not the case.
It's great to hear. Thank you, Chief. Is the tide turning on the increase in crime that we've seen across our city? And what do you think residents should expect around how quickly that might turn around if not? And what more do you need from policymakers, partners, and the public to help?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Johnson, the tide is not turning as quickly as I'd like to see it turn. You know, one of the things that I will say that that we're seeing less of is we're seeing less of the group-related violence. We're seeing less of, many of you, I know, perhaps recall the incident that occurred earlier this summer in Uptown, where there was multiple shots being fired, multiple people being injured. Those are the things that we never want to see in our city. So we haven't seen that to that level. We have been successful in making several arrests, whether that's a great MPD investigative work, as well as some significant arrests through our federal task force. And so I think that sends a message too, when individuals who have been involved in criminal behavior, harming our communities and are known in those circles have been sent away. I think that helps too, to help stem some of that tide. And so that's important. Your question regarding what can community members do, whether that's individuals continuing to call us when suspicious activity is occurring or criminal activity is occurring, to make sure they're continuing to give us a call. I think all of our council members here have got great partnerships with their local block club neighborhood groups to continue to get the inspectors, those frontline supervisors and officers there to those meetings. I know it's a little bit different with COVID. Some of those may be virtual, but I think it's important for us to continue to have that relationship with folks in those neighborhoods to continue to do that. The other thing I think that all of you have played a role in, and that's, again, looking at some of those systemic things that make it hard on our communities, whether those are experiencing homelessness, your work in terms of that, making sure that folks have the shelter that they need, really trying to work in things of employment and mental health services for our folks. All of those things contribute to a safer and healthier city, which in response helps us and helps certainly the police department in terms of public safety.
Thank you, Chief. Are we still, I know before George Floyd was murdered, we tended to send 2 officers in a squad to a majority of calls. There were some single officer squads. Is that still the case? I've heard that there's some instances where kind of as a default, we're sending 2 squads with 2 officers in them. I'm just wondering from an operational standpoint, is it still pretty consistent in terms of that configuration pre-George Floyd's murder versus today?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Johnson, yes, I think that for the most part, all the 5 precincts are operating at kind of a normal operating response in terms of the types of squads are responding or sending to these calls. They're still going to take into consideration the information in a call, the threat level in a call, whether that means additional backup is going, but I'm not hearing citywide that we're doing much differently in terms of that. We're still going to take obviously into account the information, the threat level and safety for the officers, but I'm not seeing anything that's really changed drastically since May 25th.
Thank you, Chief. I think this will probably be my last question here, and I'll actually ask Council President if it's appropriate for this meeting or if it's another one, but I know we're all committed to transformational change around public safety. Certainly you and the mayor are no exception to that. You've made that commitment, and you and the mayor have made several changes already. And I was wondering if you could share your thoughts around next steps, what other changes the public can expect to see, what the plan is around transformational change from your approach. I know the council has its approach around reimagining public safety. And before you answer that, I guess I'd ask Council President if that's an appropriate subject for this meeting, since I know this is mainly focused on operations and overall crime stats.
Yes, I think it would be great to hear from the chief. I know there'll be more to say in the future, but obviously top of mind for many of our constituents.
Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, Council Member Johnson, so thank you on that. One of the things that I'm certainly in terms of leading with our department in collaboration with other communities is creating a new MPD. And I think that message has certainly gone out throughout the organization to our sworn and civilian team members. We will not be the same MPD, nor should we. And I think that there's an opportunity for the first time ever for us to create what a new MPD looks like and what our communities want that new MPD to be. I think that it has to be guided by people, and it has to be in terms of we need the right people, leaders and influencers, regardless of rank or position, to help us move this work forward, and they must be properly supported within the organization. Community, transformational change reform must be community-centered and focused. And there has to be a process. Our organizational structure must support our values. We must hire, discipline, train our employees in a way that is consistent with our values. A piece I talked about is also data. We must capture and routinely provide clear, measurable information that is focused on that. So I will say that part of the transformational change roadmap, and I will also say that there's many tables that are being set across our city that includes community, electeds, faith leaders, and others, in helping to guide this transformational change work moving forward. There are many that I can go into to further detail. You know, it's important for me as chief to make sure that we continue to recruit and hire a diverse and inclusive workforce with an emphasis on current Minneapolis residents while providing a clear path to leadership through promotion and retention. I want to see and establish a community and MPD hiring board where community has a place and an important role in that. Model a wellness program that really is successful in not only for our employees' health and wellness so that they have long careers, but also one that includes their families. I constantly mention their family members go along on this journey with them. I want to establish a young people and chiefs committee where young people are equal partners and their voices and experiences help to center and forge true actionable reform. Many of you know that I want to continue to analyze the collective bargaining agreements in certain areas. Arbitration is another key piece to that. I also want to make sure that I know that race in the American policing institutions is inextricably linked, and I want to make sure that I can lean into national best practice researchers in that area and training to really address that. Every police department across this country, all the major city chiefs that I've spoken to, we have to really come to terms with race and the role that race plays in American policing. And those are just some of them. We'll certainly obviously have more conversations about that. But I will say this, and I'll say this again, that we must change. We must create a new MPD. I think our communities have spoken loud and clear. They don't want rhetoric. They don't want other flowery policies or newfounded trainings. They want to see substantive change. And so that is the path forward. And there's going, again, it's really going to have to be community led and driven. And so you will see MPD leaders, our sworn and civilians in those spaces, along with all of you in community to help move that work forward.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate all your answers to this. And I know that there's always a person behind every job. And this is something I've shared with you before. And I know how stressful it can be. And it's stressful on all of us. I hope that you just are making sure to take care of yourself as well, your health and well-being, because we don't want to see you or anyone else burnt out in this work, because we need you operating at full capacity, and it's really challenging times, very stressful, and that same hope for you in terms of that self-care applies as well to everyone in MPD, all of our city employees, and our community members as well, and my colleagues. It's really important to make sure we make time for that. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Schrader next.
Thank you, Council President, and thanks again, Chief. I really appreciate this presentation today. I'll also be following up just on the specific questions I had. I realize this is a very high level overview and really didn't get into a lot of the specifics I was hoping for, but I can follow up with you on that. I think the one comment I would have is that that's also what I'm getting from my constituents. Like, they are asking for a lot more specifics of, you know, how is crime being dealt with in very specific areas in my ward, whether that's a business node or problem properties that have been an issue for a very, very long time. And they're looking for specifics that are able to, not just who you're working with and all of those things. I think that's the start of it, but they really need to get into the specifics of how, when you're looking at the numbers, what metrics you're using and how that is really guiding your choices. So that is one thing to really be looking for. I'm also really interested to hear what reforms you're talking about, because I think it is one thing, one of my, I guess one thing I've been skeptical about is, you know, we're all in agreement that some change needs to happen, but it's almost disingenuous to talk about change without having the means to do that. And so when you talk about the union contract, when you talk about arbitration, these are very difficult things that, as you mentioned, every police department across this nation is dealing with. And so I think I look forward to having a real conversation about what it's going to take to change that, you know, what you're going to need from council, but also what are some ways to do that, because just to be very transparent about it, I would say one way to do that would have been to have a city charter amendment. And so I hope that we can do something in the future that you would agree with. But I think it's options like that are going to be kind of our best legal option forward. And I think we need to be talking about how we actually get to, you know, the transformational change we all agree on.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader, no, thank you for your very thoughtful thoughts and insight on that. Yes, some of the reform that you're mentioning and talking about that I think that we both agree on, it's going to take a lot of work. Some of that work is going to be some heavy lifting here on the local level. Some of that, quite frankly, as you know, when it comes to other types of things, may include some changes at our state legislature. So there's you know, and funding is a piece to that as well. And that's just not on the shoulders of our city council members and our constituents here in the city, but that may mean other types of resources that may be needed from outside that. So no, I absolutely want to talk with you and communicate with you on what that looks like and how we can work together towards that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. I had a couple of questions, and I know Councilmember Gordon has a follow-up to the earlier conversation. I'm wondering, I know we've had some conversations about communicating and some questions about crime prevention specialists. To me, I think council members get a lot of questions about MPD, and you know, we struggle because the department doesn't report to the city council. And you know, and so I know we appreciate when you come and give us updates when the rubber meets the road, though we are not there making the decisions about the functions of the department. And so I think, you know, having as much transparency with the public helps all of us be able to communicate better. And, you know, when I track down the details of particular incidents that have happened in my ward or other incidents that I get questions about, there seem to be a pretty small set of things that have happened. So there's incidents that are gang or group involved, like the shooting in Uptown. There's you know, some property crimes, and now unfortunately more frequently some armed robberies that seem to be groups of young people targeting particular geographic areas of the city, you know, in particular times. There seems to be criminal activity related to drug dealing and drug use, as you've mentioned. And then there's domestic violence related incidents. And it seems pretty rare that there's something happening that doesn't fall into one of those general categories. But when a crime occurs, there isn't much information shared about why it happened or what the circumstances were. And I think it really serves to increase fear in the community when folks don't understand what's happening and why. And so I think the more we can share about the context. And of course, everyone, we want everyone to be safe, you know, whether they're group involved or whatever the circumstances of the violence is, we absolutely want everyone to stay safe. And each of those incidents of homicide or those incidents of gun violence are unacceptable, to be clear. But, you know, for the neighbors or for the public who's reading in the newspaper or hearing on their email listservs about it, an incident, I think the context really is helpful to understand what's going on and why we're seeing different shifts of criminal activity. So can you talk more about how we communicate about that and how we can maybe do a better job of letting constituents know what's happening and why?
Madam Chair, no, that is a very important question. One of the things that I certainly know that impacts our community members is that feeling or that perception of what is occurring and why is it occurring. One of the challenges oftentimes is that after the crime occurs, whether it's the shooting in Uptown or whether it's a rash of carjackings, is that obviously our officers are trying to get there and make the apprehensions. Our investigators are trying to work diligently to gather the facts, gather the evidence, and make a successful arrest. But while all of that is occurring, which is good, and we want them to do that, but while all that is occurring, it leaves communities to have to figure out and sometimes guess, why is this occurring? Could I be the next victim? So you're absolutely right. It is important as if we can to get as much information out there. Sometimes we've done it in the sense where you've probably seen communications that have said basically an arrest was made, the community does not have to be concerned, it was not a random situation, sometimes like that. But that I know that oftentimes does not really satisfy communities, and they want to know that why. I think it's worth, and there's value in having some more discussions on that. There are some things, obviously, through through the investigation, we may not be able to publicly disclose statements that the suspect may have made or a victim may have made. But if there's a way for us to try to at least get some information that you believe community members, it would at least help temper their concerns or fears, I think that's important. But that communication is a huge piece of public safety and people's feelings. That's very important. So I absolutely think that it'd be worth having some deeper conversations on that.
Thank you, Chief. And then I appreciated the detail in the staffing update that you gave earlier. We've seen a lot of press about this, and there's a lot of interest, I think, in the speculation around officers being out for one reason or another. Can you talk about that? Because we've seen so many articles sort of indicating that a lot of officers are out or are leaving the department, but it sounds like, as you've said several times during this meeting, that we're at a normal operating level as far as response within the precincts.
Madam Chair, council members. So to your question, Madam Chair, yes, we've heard the same information or comments that have been made publicly as well. We know that traditionally we look at about 40 or 45 on average normal attrition, separations, retirements a year. We also know that we've seen at least year to date an increase in other types of separations or claims where our employees have left. And so that has been, we have seen an increase in that, but some of the numbers that have been publicly commented on, we have not seen that yet. Now, again, I will not see those separation notices until they literally are on my desk. But in terms of the numbers that have been out there that have been publicly commented on, we have not experienced that yet. But we always and will continue to look at our resources and do what we have to based on those attrition numbers, whether it's hiring freezes, whether it's classes coming forward. We will continue to prioritize to make sure that we're doing our best for the public safety and the 911 response that all 13 wards need.
Thank you. And then just one last thing. I do want to say I echo my colleagues' confidence in your leadership. And I also know that we have a lot of work ahead. I think the trauma that our community is experiencing because of George Floyd's killing is profound, but we also have over 200 complaints of police officer behavior in the days that followed. And I mean, each of those is their own open legal process, but I am concerned about making sure that we stay focused on creating, an entire city enterprise, including our police officers, our police department, that is keeping our community safe and that our community trusts and doesn't fear. And I know that that is something you've been working on for a long time as a leader in the department, but we need all hands on deck, more than ever. And we just can't allow this to be the next time that we all say this will be different and then move forward. There's just no moving forward without different, deeper change. And so I echo the confidence in your leadership, but I also know that continuing on in the ways, the pace that we've been doing in the past isn't going to meet the moment that we're in. And so we have a number of really important things underway. Of course, the Department of Human Rights legal process that will take a while. We have outcomes from the past Department of Justice work, reviewing our department. I think there's still some loose ends to be addressed and implemented from those previous incident reviews. Of course, the federal government now has isn't in a position, I guess, to be able to provide support to the city like it has in the past. So there isn't a way for us to have a new review done in that way like we have in the past. But I do think looking back to those reviews that happened after Jamar Clark was killed, after Justine Damon's death, still have a lot of value. And we have the PCOC, we have our Civil Rights Department, we have leaders within the police department, we have council members and community members wanting to help fulfill all of our promises that things will be different moving forward. So I do want to lift up that our community is really hurting, and hearing the updates about making sure that our community is safe from crime is important. And we also need to make sure that our department is providing that safety in a way that people can trust and not furthering any harm. So both things are so important right now. And I know moving forward, we'll be able to have a committee again more focused on this work. I think, it will be helpful, but all that we also have, the whole city council needing and wanting to stay involved. So yeah, I guess that can just be a comment. I know it was a long one, but I didn't want to overlook that piece of the work related to making sure that our department is changing and that we are implementing those recommendations as quickly as possible.
Madam Chair, council members, Madam Chair, thank you for your comments on that. I will tell you that some of what you said really resonated, and I will also just say that our guiding path forward, you cannot see it here, but this template moving forward, it says do no harm. And harm is defined as causing someone or something to be hurt, broken, damaged, or made less valuable. The men and women who put on this uniform, who come to work each day and night, they have to understand that. They have to believe that. We as the Minneapolis Police Department acknowledge our contribution to both historical and present day trauma. And the principle of do no harm provides us a guiding light from which all decisions must flow. And so that has to guide us in all of our actions, and every single sworn and civilian member of this department, they have to know that. Council President Bender, we cannot go back to status quo. We cannot go back to business as usual. As you mentioned, our communities are hurting, and they're looking at us to see something different, to have hope, not just for them, but for their children. And I know that for the men and women who will continue to be here today, tomorrow, and for the years to come, they're going to have to take the lead in that. and they're going to have to really, when this is looked upon years from now, I want every single person who's part of this police department to ask themselves, what did I do during that time, that moment in history to make a positive difference? And so that is a question we all have to ask ourselves. And so that is the work that I will continue to strive for.
I appreciate that, Chief. And, I'll just say too that policing isn't the only part of government systems that have needed that kind of transformational change. And I think that's part of what the council is talking about when we're talking about structural change and deep and transformational change, is understanding that it's not the individuals per se within the system, it's the system itself that was constructed in a way that is causing harm. And that has been true for other systems as well. It's true for our zoning and land use laws that codified racial exclusion in housing that we were able to work together with community to overturn. It was true of engineering that tore down neighborhoods to build freeways so that people could drive quickly through neighborhoods, that caused incredible economic damage and community damage. It tore apart vibrant communities, and it caused all kinds of harm in terms of health impacts, all of which have a history of white supremacy and racial exclusion and racial harm. And so, we could go on to more examples within government systems. So I think part of why the council is so interested in thinking about public safety not as a standalone policing only system is because we understand and acknowledge how much all of our systems need to transform and change together. So I just, I think that integration piece of how safety fits into the work of every department and how really it's incumbent on every member of our staff community in the city to be contributing to public safety and making sure everyone is safe. I think it reflects and acknowledges how much all of the systems within our government need to change and continue to evolve. We have Councilmember Gordon with, I think, a much more detailed and specific follow-up to the earlier comments.
I did, thank you, and it's hard for me to bring us back to such a kind of a detailed, mundane topic. I just want to note how incredibly helpful and interesting it was to hear this conversation and hear my colleagues' views, and I'm impressed, I think, with how united that we really are on digging in and making the transformative changes that we need to have. I just hope everyone in the city is watching and following this. I think the president said something about all hands on deck, and I'm certainly in that too. And I think it's not only all hands on deck in terms of all of us who are in this meeting, but all of us in the city need to be doing this work together. And I'm really hopeful that we can be and that we will be as we're moving forward. And I know there'll be lots of pieces and parts that people can pick up and champion. And one of those small parts had to do with business licensing and officers who are working off duty. And so I went back and I double checked, and really what we were after here, and I could read the request, is the businesses, a full list of the businesses that currently use off-duty Minneapolis police officers as security. And I guess the word currently could be looked at flexibly, because we're also thinking of who were using them before the social distancing shut down. I'll just say what we're looking for, and we're looking for today is a full list of businesses that currently use off-duty Minneapolis police officers as security, and further requesting that the police department create and maintain a public-facing list of businesses that use off-duty Minneapolis police officers as security. And I'm happy to copy that more specifically and maybe send it to the deputy chiefs as well, so that folks are aware of it. Or if there's one person you think that we should reach out to, I'd be happy to do that too, Rondo. And appreciate that we're going to be moving forward into more committee work. And just to prove that I'm interested in all hands on deck, I'm anxious and eager to get back on the Public Health, Public Safety Committee and with our new structure, so I can dig in and do more of that work with all the rest of you.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, thank you for that question. And I do know that that is something that we do track. And currently, when every officer, every employee puts in or submits to be authorized to work a off-duty employment job, obviously the business name has to be obviously a part of that, and so that is tracked for each calendar year. And so I know, again, the leadership of council members Palmisano, Fletcher, and Cano on that off-duty task force committee, but that is information that we certainly do have. I know you mentioned about a public-facing kind of a portal for that as well. We have not certainly we haven't done that. I think that the off-duty task force, that may be a question or at least something that they'll explore. But we do track the businesses that every employee puts in for, submits for to work off duty.
Well, if you could share that with me and I could maybe share it with business licensing, I think that would really be valuable too, because they weren't aware of which those businesses were.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Yeah, I'll make sure we follow up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other council members with questions or comments? I don't see any. Please let me know if I missed anyone. I'm just pausing to make sure. I'm looking back through the list. Okay. I don't see anyone. So thank you, Chief, for taking the time. And I know we look forward to hearing more. I'll be happy to follow up with you and my colleagues about a study session to take more time. I do think we will benefit as a city from some more coordination on the community engagement pieces related to all these different moving parts. I had a chance to check in with Commissioner Rebecca Lucero about the community engagement that will start with the Department of Human Rights process. We have the mayor had initiated some conversations. I know the council has been talking about more community engagement around reimagining safety. So I think the extent to which we can coordinate these various different kind of buckets of work that are happening, it will help our community feel like they can get involved and be heard in a more simple fashion than trying to track all these different moving pieces. So that could be one thing that might be nice to highlight and talk about in a study session with some more time. So thank you, and I don't see any more, so I'll direct the clerk, excuse me, thank you, Chief. I'll direct the clerk to receive and file this report, and that is our final item on our agenda today. So I do want to give a quick update on the council reorganization. Again, I will bring that forward at our next council meeting on Friday, August 28th. This will be able to include our new colleague, the Ward 6 council member elect Jamal Osman, who I was able to meet with earlier this week to talk about our council structure and how to best support his leadership and the needs of Ward 6 in our new structure, as well as recognizing he'll be a brand new council member with jumping into a lot of work. So we plan to continue to maintain our budget committee as a standalone committee as we go through the next budget cycle. We would be able to have our biz committee continue with the addition of housing work, so that would cover essentially all of the CPED functions of our council work. We would maintain POGO, but move some of the items out of this committee. And those would go to two new standing committees, public health and safety, as well as transportation and public works. And I've had a chance to check in with each of you. I just really appreciate how much you have been able to both step up and work really hard, each of us in our different roles, but as well as be so collaborative and so supportive of each other's leadership. It's quite incredible, I think, that we are working so well together as a body right now in a time of crisis in our city. And it really speaks to each of your commitment to each other and to governing well. And it's not inevitable. It takes work and it takes commitment. So I appreciate it so much. And it really showed up in each of the conversations that I had with you, how much you're willing to chip in as well as to support each other's leadership. So I will leave it at that for now, and again have sent out some of those details. And I'll just note that because of the items related to the public hearings that we will have in our next cycle, those would be coming to the council meeting on Friday potentially, or we'll wait to set those until after we have the structure finalized. So I'll see if the clerk wants to add anything to that.
Madam Chair, the only thing I would hope to add is that we would want to adjourn this meeting until 1 o'clock the following Thursday when we return. There are some activities that were already noticed for public hearings that were specifically noticed to come to POGO on a date certain. And I apologize, I don't have that exactly in front of me, and perhaps Ms. Menchek does. But there was a prior notice on several high-profile issues, specifically noticed for POGO, and so our recommendation is that in order to be consistent and not have to go through renoticing, that we would adjourn this meeting and take up those items and then move back the first regular meeting of what is proposed for public health and safety, I think by about 30 minutes, so that we could accommodate the action on those noticed items in this committee before we then fully activate the new structure that you've outlined.
Great, thank you, Mr. Carl. So I appreciate that, and I do see that noted here. I was trying to be expedient here in wrapping up, but so yes, so in order to accommodate those scheduled public hearings, we will adjourn this meeting of POGO to September 10th at 1:30 p.m. That will allow us to move forward with those previously noticed public hearings without having to reschedule them, and then we'll transition into the new structure. If any council members have any questions about that, we can follow up by email or phone. And of course, our calendar is frequently updated in the LIMS system for members of the public to be able to track our work. So with that, unless there are any questions or any further discussion, we stand adjourned to September 10th at 1:30 p.m. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.